The Apache warrior's chest burned against Emily's cheek as consciousness flickered back. She'd fallen asleep against her rescuer during the sandstorm, unaware that by tribal law this single act of trust had just made her his wife. "You belong to Standing Wolf now." The chief's voice cut through the morning air like a blade, while Emily's blue eyes widened in horror. She'd survived bandits buried her husband and walked alone through hell, only to wake as an unwilling Apache bride in a world that wanted her dead. Want to know how a widow's desperate survival became a love that defied two worlds? Stick with me through this incredible true story from the American frontier and drop a comment about where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far Emily's tale has traveled. The wagon wheel cracked against granite with a sound like breaking bones, and Emily Carter knew before the wood even finished splintering that her last hope of reaching California had just died in the Arizona desert. The October sun hammered down mercilessly as she stood beside the broken wreckage, her calloused hands trembling not from fear but from pure bone-deep exhaustion. 23 years old, widowed for barely 3 months, and now completely alone in a landscape that seemed designed by God himself to kill anyone foolish enough to cross it. "Move along, Mrs. Carter," Benjamin Hayes called from his wagon, already pulling ahead with the rest of the train. His wife Martha peered out from beneath the canvas, her face a mixture of pity and relief. "You know we can't stop. Not here. Apache territory." Emily wanted to scream at them, wanted to remind them that she'd shared her last flower with the Hayes family just 2 weeks ago when their supplies ran low. But she held her tongue. Bad luck. That's what they'd been calling her ever since the bandits had attacked their camp near the Colorado River, leaving her husband Thomas bleeding out in her arms while she pressed her hands uselessly against wounds that wouldn't stop flowing. "I understand." She managed her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Go on, I'll catch up." But they both knew she wouldn't. A woman alone with a broken wagon and a lame horse in the heart of Apache lands. Benjamin Hayes was simply too polite to say what everyone was thinking: Emily Carter would be dead by nightfall. The dust from the departing wagon train hadn't even settled before Emily began salvaging what she could carry. Her hands moved mechanically, years of frontier living having taught her the cruel arithmetic of survival. Water, 2 canteens, maybe 3 days if she was careful. Food, hardtack, dried beans, a precious handful of salt. Thomas's rifle, though she had only 12 bullets left. His knife, a blanket. Everything else her mother's china carefully wrapped and carried from Boston. The daguerreotype of her wedding day, the Bible with pressed flowers from her garden back home, would have to stay with the broken wagon offerings to the desert that had already taken so much. She'd made it perhaps 2 miles following the wagon ruts with grim determination when the horizon began to blur. At first, Emily thought it was tears she'd forbidden herself from crying, since Thomas died knowing that once she started, she might never stop. But then the wind hit, carrying a wall of sand that turned day into twilight. The sandstorm struck with the force of a living thing, angry and blind. Emily dropped to her knees, pulling the blanket over her head, trying to create a pocket of breathable air as sand invaded everything: her nose, her mouth, her eyes. The world disappeared into a howling brown chaos that seemed to go on forever. She tried to pray, but the words were ripped away by the wind. This was how she would die, she realized with an odd sense of calm. Not from Apache arrows or rattlesnake bites, but buried alive by the desert itself, becoming just another set of bones for future travelers to find and wonder about. That's when she felt the hand on her shoulder. Emily screamed, though the sound was swallowed by the storm. Through the whirling sand, she could barely make out the figure, tall, powerful, moving through the chaos as if he'd been born to it. An Apache warrior, his long black hair whipping in the wind, his face painted with designs that made him look like something from her nightmares. This was it then. A quicker death than suffocation at least. But instead of the killing blow she expected, strong arms lifted her from the ground. She fought instinctively, weakly, her fists connecting with a chest that felt like stone wrapped in buckskin. The warrior said something in a language she didn't understand, his voice somehow cutting through the storm's roar. Then he was carrying her, moving with impossible sureness through the blinding sand. Emily felt herself being lifted onto a horse. How any animal could stand in this weather was beyond her comprehension. The warrior swung up behind her, his arms coming around to take the reins, creating a shelter with his body. The horse began to move, guided by some instinct or knowledge Emily couldn't fathom. "Please," she gasped, not even sure what she was begging for. Death, mercy, salvation. "Be still," the warrior said in accented English, the first words she understood. "Storm will eat you if you fall." So Emily did the only thing she could do. She pressed back against his chest, letting his larger frame shield her from the worst of the sand. His body radiated heat like a furnace, and somewhere between terror and exhaustion, somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, Emily's eyes closed. The last thought she had before unconsciousness took her was how strange it was that death should smell like sage and wood smoke, and wild places humans had never touched. Standing Wolf felt the white woman go limp against him and tightened his hold, guiding his horse through the storm with the certainty of one who had ridden these lands since childhood. He'd been tracking the wagon train for 3 days, watching from the ridgelines as they struggled through Apache territory like blind children. His war chief Mangas Coloradas had wanted to attack them, take their supplies and horses. But Standing Wolf had argued for patience, let them pass through weak and frightened spreading word that the Apache controlled these lands absolutely. He hadn't planned to save anyone, especially not a white woman. But when he'd seen her through the storm, kneeling in the sand with that blanket over her head, something had moved in him. Perhaps it was the way she'd kept walking even after her own people abandoned her. Perhaps it was the sight of her carefully rationing her water earlier that day, disciplined even in desperation. Or perhaps it was simply that Standing Wolf, who had seen so much death in his 28 years, was tired of watching people die. The storm began to weaken as they climbed into the foothills, following paths invisible to anyone who hadn't spent their life learning the desert's secrets. By the time they reached the hidden canyon where his band was camped, the wind had died to occasional gusts, and the air was clearing. Standing Wolf's arrival with the unconscious white woman caused an immediate stir. Warriors emerged from their wickiups' hands on weapons. Women pulled children back, whispering prayers and curses in equal measure. His grandmother, Ghost Dancer, stood from her place by the central fire, her ancient face unreadable. "What have you brought us, grandson?" she asked in Apache, her voice carrying despite its softness. "I found her in the storm." Standing Wolf replied, dismounting carefully with the woman still in his arms. "Her people left her to die." "Then let her die," said Angry Cloud. Standing Wolf's cousin spitting into the dust. "White eyes bring nothing but death. You know this." Standing Wolf did know this. He'd seen what white settlers did to Apache land's Apache people. He'd helped bury children killed by soldiers' bullets, watched springs poisoned and game driven away. But looking down at the unconscious woman in his arms, her face gaunt from hardship, her hands calloused from work, her breathing shallow but steady, he couldn't simply let her die. "She sleeps against you," Ghost Dancer observed, her voice taking on a different quality. "She trusts you with her spirit while it walks the dream paths." A murmur ran through the gathered Apache. Everyone knew what that meant, the old law that governed such things. Standing Wolf felt his jaw tighten. He hadn't considered that, hadn't thought about the implications when the white woman had relaxed against him in her exhaustion. "She was dying," he said. "She had no choice." "There is always a choice," Ghost Dancer replied. "She could have fought you until the storm took her. She could have thrown herself from your horse. Instead, she chose to trust. The law is clear." Chief Nachi emerged from his wickiup, his presence immediately commanding attention. In his 60s, scarred from countless battles, he remained an imposing figure. His dark eyes took in the scene, Standing Wolf holding the white woman. The gathered crowd, Ghost Dancer's meaningful expression. "Bring her to the medicine lodge," he commanded. "When she wakes, we will see what the spirits have brought us." Standing Wolf carried Emily to a small wickiup that served as a healing place, laying her carefully on a bed of soft furs. Ghost Dancer followed, bringing water and herbs. As she began to tend to the unconscious woman, cleaning the sand from her face and checking for injuries, she spoke quietly to her grandson. "You have always been different, Standing Wolf. While others rushed to war, you watched and waited. While others took scalps, you counted coup and showed mercy. Perhaps this is why the spirits led you to her." I saved her from the storm, nothing more, Standing Wolf insisted, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. You saved her, Ghost Dancer agreed, and now by the old law she is yours to protect. Whether blessing or curse, only time will show. Emily woke slowly as if swimming up from deep water. Her first sensation was warmth. She was lying on something soft, covered with blankets that smelled of smoke and herbs. Her second sensation was pain. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed sand, which she realized she probably had. The third sensation was fear as memory crashed back and she remembered the Apache warrior who had carried her through the storm. She sat up too quickly, her head spinning, and found herself looking into the eyes of an elderly Apache woman. The woman's face was deeply lined, marked by decades of desert sun, but her eyes were kind. She held out a clay cup. Drink, she said in English. Slow. Emily took the cup with shaking hands, sipping what turned out to be some kind of herbal tea. It was bitter but soothing, easing the rawness in her throat. As she drank, she became aware of voices outside speaking in rapid Apache. Many voices. Angry voices. Where am I? She asked, though she suspected she knew. Safe, the old woman replied. I am Ghost Dancer. You are in Apache camp. Safe. Emily almost laughed at the absurdity of it. A white woman in an Apache camp surrounded by people who had every reason to hate her kind, and this old woman called it safe. The man who found me in the storm. Standing Wolf, my grandson. Ghost Dancer studied Emily with those penetrating eyes. You slept against him, trusted him with your spirit. I was dying. I didn't mean anything by it. Ghost Dancer's expression didn't change. The heart does not lie even in sleep. You are called Emily, Emily Carter. Emily Carter, Ghost Dancer repeated as if tasting the strange syllables. You have husband, dead. The word came out flat, emotionless. Bandits killed him 3 months ago. Something shifted in Ghost Dancer's expression, perhaps sympathy, perhaps calculation. You are alone. Yes. Before Ghost Dancer could respond, the entrance flap was pushed aside and Chief Nachi entered, followed by Standing Wolf and several other warriors. Emily instinctively pressed back against the wickiup wall, her heart racing. She'd heard stories about what Apache did to white captives, especially women. The torture, the slavery, the other things. Chief Nachi said something in Apache, his voice formal and commanding. Ghost Dancer translated. The chief says you present us with difficult choice. You have seen our camp, our faces. We cannot simply let you leave. Emily's mouth went dry. Are you going to kill me? That is one voice in the council, Ghost Dancer admitted. But there is another matter. You slept against Standing Wolf. By our old law, this means you trust him with your life. You accept his protection. I don't understand. Standing Wolf stepped forward, and Emily got her first clear look at him without the storm and terror clouding her vision. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps late 20s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of dark amber. His hair fell past his shoulders, decorated with beads and feathers. There was an intensity to him that made her want to look away and keep staring at the same time. Among my people, he said in careful English, when a woman sleeps against a warrior in trust, she becomes his wife. The words hit Emily like physical blows. What? No, that's insane. I was unconscious. The law does not speak of consciousness, Chief Nachi said through Ghost Dancer. It speaks of trust. You could have fought. You could have chosen death. Instead, you chose to accept his protection. I didn't choose anything. Emily's voice rose, panic clawing at her chest. I was dying in a sandstorm. I didn't even know who he was. And yet you knew he was Apache, Chief Nachi observed. Your people fear us above all others, but you did not fight. You did not throw yourself from the horse. You rested against him and let him bring you here. Emily looked around wildly, searching for some escape, some argument that would make them see reason. You can't force me to marry someone. That's slavery. No force, shh, Standing Wolf said quietly. You can refuse. Hope flared in Emily's chest. Then I refuse. I absolutely refuse. Chief Nachi nodded as if he'd expected this. Very well. The old law provides for this also. If you refuse the protection you accepted in trust, you must prove you can survive without it. 7 days alone in the desert. If you live, you are free to go wherever you wish. If you return before 7 days, or if Standing Wolf must save you again, then you accept the bond. That's murder, Emily whispered. 7 days alone without supplies. You will have water, food, even weapon. Chief Nachi's expression was impassive. Same as any Apache woman would have. This is not punishment, it is proof. If you can survive without the protection you accepted, then you never truly needed it. Emily looked at Standing Wolf, searching his face for some sign of what he thought about all this. His expression was unreadable, but she thought she saw something in his eyes, regret, resignation. Do you want this? She asked him directly. Do you want a wife who's forced to marry you? Want does not matter, he replied. The law is the law, but... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I would not see you die in the desert. Take the trial if you must. But know that there is no shame in accepting what has already begun. Nothing has begun, Emily said firmly. I'll take your trial. A murmur ran through the gathered Apache. Some sounded approving, others disappointed. Chief Nachi nodded once. Tomorrow, then. Rest today. Eat. Prepare. Ghost Dancer will tend your wounds from the storm. The men filed out, leaving Emily alone with Ghost Dancer again. The old woman was mixing something in a clay bowl, herbs and water, creating a paste. You are brave, she said. Foolish, but brave. I can't marry him, Emily said desperately. I don't even know him. My husband has only been dead 3 months, and he's Apache. And you are white, Ghost Dancer replied calmly, beginning to apply the paste to Emily's sand-scraped hands. Both truths, both problems. But the desert does not care about such things. In 7 days you will be dead or you will be his wife. I'll survive, Emily said with more confidence than she felt. I've survived everything else. Ghost Dancer's lips curved in what might have been a smile. Perhaps. But Standing Wolf is not like other warriors. He sees things others miss, feels things others ignore. If the spirits meant you for him, 7 days in the desert will not change that. That night, Emily barely slept. She lay on the furs in the medicine lodge, listening to the sounds of the Apache camp children, laughing dogs, barking, the low murmur of conversations around cook fires. It sounded so normal. Not the war camp full of savage killers she'd imagined, but a community of families living their lives. When dawn came, Ghost Dancer brought her Apache clothing, a deerskin skirt and blouse moccasins that fit better than her worn boots. Your white clothes will not survive the desert, she explained. These will protect you better. Emily wanted to refuse to cling to this last piece of her identity, but she knew the old woman was right. She changed quickly, feeling strange in the soft leather that moved with her body, instead of constraining it. Standing Wolf was waiting outside with Chief Nachi and several other warriors. He held out a bundle blanket, water gourds, dried meat, a knife, even a small bow with a handful of arrows. More than I would give most, he said quietly. But I'm told white women are not taught survival as Apache women are. I can take care of myself, Emily replied, taking the bundle. Yes, he said, and she was surprised to hear what sounded like approval in his voice. I believe you will try. They led her out of the camp and into the desert, perhaps 3 miles from the hidden canyon. The sun was already climbing, promising another day of brutal heat. 7 days, Chief Nachi said, starting when we leave. If you return before then, or if you are found needing rescue, you accept the bond. If you survive 7 days alone, you are free. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. Standing Wolf stepped closer, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes. There is water at the Red Rock's half-day walk north, he said quietly in English, too low for the others to hear. Shelter in the caves near the salt flats. Rattlesnakes sun themselves on the south-facing rocks in morning. Avoid those places. Why are you helping me? She whispered back. He was quiet for a long moment. Because a forced wife is no wife at all. Survive, Emily Carter. Prove the law wrong, or come back and we will find another way through this. Then they were gone, walking back toward their hidden camp, leaving Emily alone in the vast expanse of desert. She watched until they disappeared over a ridge, then looked around at the landscape that would either kill her or send her back to an unwanted marriage. The first day wasn't as hard as she'd expected. Emily found the red rocks Standing Wolf had mentioned, and there was indeed a small spring trickling between them. She filled her water gourds, drank deeply, and considered her options. 7 days. She could do this. She'd walked for weeks with the wagon train, survived bandit attacks, nursed her dying husband, and buried him with her own hands. 7 days alone was nothing compared to that. She made a shelter in the shade of the rocks using her blanket and some sturdy branches, then set about making snares with strips torn from her old petticoat that she'd kept. Thomas had taught her that back when they were first married and playing at being frontier settlers. The memory hurt, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to grieve out here. By nightfall, she had caught nothing, but she'd found some edible plants that Ghost Dancer had pointed out when they walked to the trial site. Prickly pear, cactus, mesquite beans, even some piñon nuts from an old cache probably left by animals. She wouldn't starve, at least not immediately. The second day was harder. The sun seemed hotter, the distances longer. Emily tried to hunt with the bow Standing Wolf had given her, but her shots went wide and she lost 2 of her precious arrows. She found herself thinking about him as she searched for the missed shafts. Why had he saved her? He could have let the storm take her, and no one would have known or cared. That night she heard coyotes howling closer than comfortable. She built up her small fire, knowing it would announce her position to anyone watching but needing the protection it offered from night predators. As she fed sticks to the flames, she wondered if Standing Wolf was out there somewhere, watching to make sure she was safe. The thought should have frightened her, but instead she found it oddly comforting. The third day brought disaster. Emily woke to find her water gourds had leaked in the night. One was completely empty, the other only half full. The spring at the Red Rocks was a day's walk back, but there might be water closer if she could find it. She spent the morning searching her throat, already parched, her lips beginning to crack. By afternoon, she was dizzy from dehydration. She found shade under a large boulder and tried to rest, but her mind kept playing tricks on her. She thought she saw Thomas walking toward her through the heat shimmer, thought she heard her mother calling her name. She knew these were hallucinations, knew she needed water soon or she would die, but her legs felt too heavy to move. That's when she saw the Apache warrior on the ridgeline. Not Standing Wolf, she knew his silhouette by now, had memorized it without meaning to. This was someone else watching her struggle, waiting perhaps to see if she would give up, if she would admit defeat and call for help. Emily forced herself to her feet, using the boulder for support. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her quit. She would not prove them right about weak white women. She would not. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed into the sand. The last of her water had spilled, soaking immediately into the thirsty ground. She tried to crawl toward it to somehow salvage something, but it was gone. The warrior on the ridge started moving toward her. "No!" Emily gasped, though she could barely make a sound. "Not yet. It hasn't been 7 days." But her body wouldn't cooperate. The sun hammered down and darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw was Standing Wolf's face above her. When had he arrived? His expression a mixture of concern and something else she couldn't name. When Emily woke this time, she was back in the medicine lodge. Ghost Dancer's weathered hands cool on her fevered forehead. Her throat hurt worse than before, and her skin felt tight and hot from sunburn. "How long?" she croaked. "3 days you have been gone," Ghost Dancer replied. "Standing Wolf brought you back when the sun was highest. 3 days. Not even half the trial period." Emily turned her face to the wall, tears leaking from her eyes despite her dehydration. She had failed completely. "I couldn't do it," she whispered. "I couldn't even last 3 days." "The desert is harsh, teacher," Ghost Dancer said gently. "It cares nothing for pride or determination. Only knowledge and respect keep us alive here." Standing Wolf entered the lodge, carrying a water gourd. His face was unreadable as he knelt beside Emily, helping her sit up to drink. His hands were gentle but impersonal, as if she were just another wounded creature he'd found in the desert. "The trial is over," he said quietly. "You need not go back." "So I'm your wife now." Emily couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Your unwilling captive wife. You are under my protection, he corrected. What that means, we will decide together. Chief Nachi entered along with several other Apache Emily hadn't met. They spoke rapidly in their language, gesturing occasionally toward her. Standing Wolf responded calmly, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. Finally, Chief Nachi addressed her directly in English. The trial is ended. By our law, you are now wife to Standing Wolf. This means you are Apache. You will live as Apache work, as Apache follow Apache ways. And if I refuse, if I try to leave, then you break the law you accepted. The penalty for that. Chief Nachi shrugged. Best not to find out. After they left, Emily looked at Standing Wolf. Are you going to... Am I expected to, No, he said firmly, understanding her unfinished question. I will not touch you without your consent. You will have your own space in my wiki-up. To the others we are married. Between us, he paused. Between us we will find our own way. Why? Emily asked. Why are you doing this? You could have let me die in that storm. You could have let me die in the trial. You could take what Apache law says is yours. Why aren't you up? Standing Wolf was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. When I was young, soldiers came to our winter camp while the warriors were hunting. They killed many. My mother, my younger sister. I survived because I hid a coward in the rocks while my family died. Emily said nothing, sensing this wasn't a story he told often. For years I hated all whites, wanted only revenge. But hate is like drinking poison, hoping others will die. It ate at me until Ghost Dancer, my grandmother, taught me different way. She said the spiral of killing would only end when someone chose to stop killing. He looked at Emily directly. I saved you because I could. Because choosing life over death is always better path. I offer you respect and protection because forcing you would make me no better than soldiers who forced themselves on Apache women. I don't know how to be Apache, Emily said quietly. I don't know your language, your customs, anything. You will learn. Ghost Dancer will teach you. The other women, he paused, some will be cruel. They have reasons, but others will help if you let them. And us, what are we to each other? Standing Wolf considered this. Whatever we choose to be, perhaps friends in time, perhaps partners. Perhaps we simply share a wiki-up and protection until you find way to leave safely. I do not know, but we have time to decide. That night, Emily moved into Standing Wolf's wiki-up. It was larger than she expected, divided by hanging blankets into two spaces. Her area had fresh furs for sleeping her salvaged belongings from the desert trial, and even some decorative beadwork that she suspected Ghost Dancer had added. Standing Wolf's side was sparse weapons clothing, a few personal items she couldn't identify. He showed her where everything was explained, the basic rules of Apache camp life, then retreated to his own space. Emily lay awake on the unfamiliar furs, listening to the sound of his breathing on the other side of the blanket. Her husband by Apache law, her protector by necessity, but in reality a stranger who had shown her more kindness than her own people had in her darkest hour. The next morning brought the reality of her new life. The women came for her early, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. A younger woman named Singing Bird, who spoke some English, was designated as her primary teacher. You will learn women's work. Singing Bird explained not unkindly, but without warmth. Gathering, preparing food, making baskets, tanning hides. Standing Wolf is good hunter, respected warrior. His wife must not shame him. The work was harder than anything Emily had done before. Her soft hands, already damaged from the desert trial, blistered and bled as she learned to process plants, scrape hides, and weave baskets. The other women watched her struggle with expressions that ranged from satisfaction to pity. One woman in particular seemed to take pleasure in Emily's difficulties. Yellow Moon was beautiful in the way a knife is beautiful, sharp, and dangerous. She had wanted Standing Wolf for herself. Singing Bird quietly explained and saw Emily as a thief. White woman, Yellow Moon said in broken English. During Emily's third day of training, you think you take our best warrior. You will fail. He will see you are weak, useless. Then he will throw you away. Emily's temper, held in check by exhaustion and fear, finally snapped. Maybe I am weak by your standards. she said, standing to face Yellow Moon directly. "But I'm here. I survived your desert trial longer than you expected, and I'm learning. Every day I'm learning. Can you say the same, or do you only know how to hate?" The silence that followed was deafening. Several women gasped at Emily's audacity. Yellow Moon's face darkened with rage, and for a moment Emily thought the woman would attack her. Then Ghost Dancer's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Enough! Yellow Moon, your work is elsewhere. Emily Carter, come." Emily followed the elderly woman away from the group, her heart still racing from the confrontation. Ghost Dancer led her to a quieter spot where medicinal plants grew in careful cultivation. "You have spine," Ghost Dancer observed. "Good. You will need it. But spine without wisdom is how people get killed. Yellow Moon is dangerous enemy." "I couldn't just let her—" "Yes, you could, and should have. Pride is luxury you cannot afford yet." Ghost Dancer handed her a digging stick. "Now you will learn medicine plants. This is valuable knowledge and perhaps will earn you place here better than sharp tongue." The lessons with Ghost Dancer became the best part of Emily's days. The old woman was patient but exacting, teaching not just which plants healed which ailments, but the stories and spiritual significance behind them. Emily found herself genuinely interested, remembering her mother's herb garden back in Boston and how she'd loved learning the uses for each plant. Standing Wolf, meanwhile, kept his distance during the days. He left before dawn to hunt or scout with the other warriors, returning after sunset. They ate together in relative silence, him asking if she needed anything, her reporting on her day's lessons. It was formal, polite, and desperately awkward. But at night, lying on opposite sides of the wickiup, they sometimes talked. In the darkness, with the barrier of the blanket between them, it was easier somehow. "Tell me about your husband," Standing Wolf said one night, surprising her with the personal question. Emily was quiet for a long moment. "Thomas was a good man, kind. He wanted to be a farmer in California, grow oranges. He had such dreams." Her voice trailed off. "How did he die?" "Bandits. We were camped by the Colorado River. They came at night wanting our supplies. Thomas tried to protect me, but there were too many. They shot him and left him to bleed out in my arms. Took everything except what they thought was worthless, including me." "Why did your people blame you?" Emily laughed bitterly. "A woman whose husband dies violently is bad luck, cursed, and I had no male relatives with the train, no protection. They tolerated me for a while, but when things got harder, when we lost more people to sickness and accidents, it was easier to blame the cursed widow than admit the journey was just dangerous." "My people have similar beliefs sometimes," Standing Wolf admitted, "but Ghost Dancer says curse is usually just explanation for things we do not understand." "Your grandmother is wise." "Yes, too wise sometimes. She sees things others miss." "What does she see in us?" Emily asked, then immediately wished she hadn't. Standing Wolf was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "She says the spirits laugh at our plans, that sometimes they put people together who should not fit just to see what happens." "And what do you think?" "I think the spirits have strange sense of humor." Despite herself, Emily smiled in the darkness. The fourth day of her new life brought unexpected crisis. A young boy named Little Fox was brought to the medicine lodge screaming in pain. He'd been playing in the rocks and disturbed a mountain cat which had mauled his leg badly before the warriors drove it off. Ghost Dancer worked frantically to stop the bleeding, but the wounds were deep and jagged. Emily watched for a moment, then stepped forward. "I can help," she said. "My mother was a midwife. She taught me to stitch wounds." Ghost Dancer looked at her sharply, then at the dying boy. "Show me." Emily's hands moved with remembered skill, cleaning the wounds with boiled water, using sinew and a bone needle to carefully close the gashes. She'd helped her mother with similar injuries back in Boston when factory workers came with mangled hands and arms. The boy's mother wailed and prayed. Other women gathered to watch, and warriors stood guard as if their presence could keep death away. Standing Wolf appeared at some point, his eyes never leaving Emily's face as she worked. It took 2 hours to clean and stitch all the wounds. By the end, Emily's hands were cramping and her back ached from bending over the boy, but his breathing was steady and the bleeding had stopped. "He will live if infection does not take him," she told Ghost Dancer. The wounds need to be cleaned daily, kept covered with honey, if you have it. Honey prevents rot. Ghost Dancer translated for the boy's mother, who fell to her knees and grabbed Emily's bloody hands, kissing them and sobbing words Emily didn't understand but whose meaning was clear. That night, the atmosphere in the camp was different. Women who had ignored Emily nodded when she passed. Warriors who had watched her with suspicion now looked thoughtful. Even Yellow Moon stayed silent, though her eyes still burned with resentment. "You did good thing," Standing Wolf said as they ate their evening meal. "Little Fox is my cousin's son. His father died last winter. To lose him too would break her spirit. Anyone would have done the same. No. Many would have stayed silent, afraid to fail. You risked much. If Boy had died, they would blame you. I couldn't just watch him die when I knew I could help." Standing Wolf studied her face in the firelight. "You are not what I expected, Emily Carter." "What did you expect? Weak woman who would cry and beg to be returned to her people. Instead," he shook his head, "instead you face Yellow Moon, learn from Ghost Dancer, save Apache child. You are full of surprises. Is that good or bad? I do not know yet, but it is interesting." That night, for the first time, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. The weeks that followed Little Fox's recovery marked a turning point in Emily's acceptance within the band. The boy's wounds healed cleanly without the fever that often claimed lives after such injuries, and his mother, Spotted Dove, became Emily's fierce advocate among the women. She would appear at Emily's side during the hardest tasks, wordlessly taking half the burden, her presence a shield against Yellow Moon's continued hostility. Standing Wolf noticed the change. He began lingering a few moments longer in their wiki-up each morning, asking not just if she needed anything, but how her lessons were progressing, what she was learning from Ghost Dancer. These conversations were still formal, careful, but Emily found herself looking forward to them. "The women say you learn quickly," he mentioned one morning as he adjusted his bow. "Singing Bird says you can now prepare prickly pear without cursing." Emily laughed, surprising them both. "Only because I've pulled out most of the needles from my fingers by now. I think I've been stabbed by every plant in the desert." "Desert teaches with pain," Standing Wolf said, a slight smile softening his usually serious face. "But you do not complain. This is unexpected." "Would complaining make the needles hurt less?" "No, but most whites complain even when there is no pain." It was the first time he'd made anything approaching a joke with her, and Emily felt something shift between them, subtle but significant. That evening, when he returned from hunting with a deer across his shoulders, he called her over to watch as he butchered it. "You should know this," he said, his hands efficient and sure as he worked. "A wife should know how to use everything, waste nothing." Emily watched carefully, noting how he separated the hide for tanning, the meat for eating, and drying the sinew for thread, the bones for tools. Nothing was discarded. When he offered her the knife to try, she took it without hesitation, following his quiet instructions. "Your hands are steady," he observed as she carefully separated a section of meat along the natural lines of muscle. "Have you done this before?" "My uncle was a butcher in Boston. When I was young, before it was deemed improper for a lady, I would help in his shop." She paused, remembering. "My mother was horrified, but Uncle Patrick said knowing how to feed yourself was never improper." "Wise man. He would have liked you," Emily said without thinking, then froze, realizing what she'd said. Standing Wolf was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "He valued skill over talk, said you could judge a man by how he treated his tools and his meat with respect or waste." She gestured at his careful work. "You respect both." That night, as they ate the fresh venison, Standing Wolf spoke more than usual, telling her about the seasonal movements of deer, how to read their tracks, which plants they favored. Emily found herself asking questions, genuinely interested, and he seemed pleased by her attention. Ghost Dancer, watching from her own fire, nudged Singing Bird. "See how they lean toward each other without knowing the spirits work slowly but surely." "She is still white," Singing Bird replied doubtfully. "That will not change." "No, but perhaps that is why she was sent. Change comes whether we wish it or not. Better to have bridges than only walls." The next morning brought troubling news. Scouts had spotted soldiers 2 days' ride to the east more than had been seen in months. Chief Nachi called a council, and Emily watched from the doorway of her wickiup as the warriors gathered, their faces grim. Standing Wolf returned to their wickiup briefly, his expression tense. "Stay inside today. Do not walk alone. The soldiers search for someone, maybe Apache who raided their supply train. Maybe something else. But they are angry, dangerous. Are we in danger here? Our camp is hidden, but—" He hesitated. "If they find us, you must stay with Ghost Dancer. Your white skin might protect you, or it might make things worse. I cannot say which." The fear in Emily's stomach was different from the constant low-level anxiety she'd lived with since joining the Apache. This was immediate, sharp. "What about you?" "I am warrior. I will fight if needed." He must have seen something in her expression because his voice softened slightly. "We have evaded soldiers many times. This is likely nothing, but caution keeps us alive." For 2 days, the camp remained tense and quiet. The children were kept close, the cooking fires smaller to reduce smoke. Scouts came and went like shadows, reporting the soldiers' movements. Emily found herself constantly watching the ridgeline, expecting to see blue uniforms appearing at any moment. On the third morning, the scouts reported the soldiers had turned south, following false trails the Apache had laid. The camp exhaled collectively, normal activities resuming. But that evening, Standing Wolf came to the wickiup earlier than usual, his face troubled. "The soldiers had paper with drawing," he said. "Scouts saw it when they watched the soldier camp, a white woman's face. They say it looked like you." Emily's blood turned cold. "Me? But who would— Perhaps your people reported you stolen. Perhaps they seek to rescue you." The irony of it being searched for now when her own people had abandoned her would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous. "What does this mean?" "It means you cannot leave camp alone. It means if soldiers come, they might try to take you by force, claiming rescue. It means—" He paused, struggling with something. "It means you must be clearly Apache. Clearly my wife, or they will not stop searching." "I don't understand." Standing Wolf moved closer, his voice low and urgent. "A captive white woman brings soldiers, brings trouble. But a woman who has chosen, who is married, who cannot be rescued against her will— this is different story, less interesting to soldiers and settlers." "So I need to be more convincing as your wife," Emily said slowly. "In front of others, you mean?" "Yes, and perhaps—" He seemed uncomfortable. "Perhaps we must make the marriage true in Apache way. Not just Chief Nachi's words, but ceremony. So all know, Apache and white, that you are here by choice." Emily's throat tightened. "A real ceremony. Only ceremony. Nothing changes between us privately, but publicly we must be what the law says we are. For your safety. For the band's safety." The pragmatism of it should have made it easier to accept, but somehow it made everything more complicated. Emily had been growing comfortable with their strange arrangement, the careful distance that let them slowly learn each other. A public ceremony, a performance of being truly married, it felt like crossing a line she wasn't ready for. But she thought of the children in the camp of Little Fox, whose life she'd saved, of Spotted Dove, who had become her friend. If soldiers came, because of her people would die. "When might?" she asked. 3 days. Ghost Dancer will prepare you. I am sorry it must be this way." He left before she could respond, and Emily sat alone in the wickiup, her mind churning. Through the buffalo hide walls, she could hear the normal sounds of evening children being called to bed, dogs barking, the low murmur of conversations. This had become her world, she realized. Without meaning to, without choosing it, she had begun to belong here. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Ghost Dancer and Singing Bird took charge of Emily, teaching her the words she would need to say in Apache, dressing her in a beautiful doe-skin dress decorated with elk teeth and turquoise. Her hair was washed with yucca root and arranged in the style of married Apache women, wrapped with strips of rabbit fur and decorated with silver pins that Ghost Dancer said had belonged to Standing Wolf's mother. "You are frightened," Ghost Dancer observed as she painted traditional designs on Emily's face with red ochre. "Yes." "Of the ceremony or of what comes after?" "Both, neither, I don't know." Emily's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Where I come from, marriage means it's supposed to mean love, choice. This is neither. Is it not? Ghost Dancer's ancient hands were gentle as she adjusted Emily's hair. You chose to take the trial. You chose to return when you could have died in the desert. You chose to save Little Fox. You chose to stay when Standing Wolf offered to find you way to leave. Many choices all leading here. That's not the same as choosing to marry him. No. Then what is marriage but series of choices to stay, to go, to fight, to yield, to build together, or tear apart? Ghost Dancer stepped back to examine her work. Standing Wolf also did not choose this, but see how he prepares, how he tries to make it easier for you. This too is choice. Through the Wickiup entrance, Emily could see Standing Wolf across the camp, dressed in his finest war shirt, his hair freshly braided with eagle feathers. He looked magnificent and terrifying, and somehow vulnerable all at once. As if sensing her gaze, he turned, their eyes meeting across the distance. He nodded once, slightly a question and reassurance combined. The ceremony took place at sunset. The entire band gathered in a circle around the central fire. Chief Nachi spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the desert. Emily understood only fragments, but she recognized the solemnity, the weight of tradition in his words. When prompted, she repeated the Apache phrases Singing Bird had taught her, promising to be a good wife, to support her husband, to be one with the people. Her voice shook only slightly, and she was proud of that small victory. Standing Wolf's portion was longer, more complex. He spoke of protection, of provision, of the joining of two paths into one. When he switched to English for her benefit, the camp grew especially quiet. Emily Carter, smacham, he said, his voice carrying clearly, I take you as wife before my people and yours. I offer you my protection, my respect, my name. You are no longer white woman alone. You are Apache. You are family. You are... He paused, seeming to search for words. You are the one who chose to stay. The weight of that, the one who chose to stay, hit Emily unexpectedly hard. Because it was true. Somewhere between that first desperate night and now she had chosen this, even if she hadn't realized it. Chief Nachi bound their wrists together with a strip of white deerskin, then led them 3 times around the fire. The band began to sing a low, haunting melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Emily didn't know the words, but she felt them in her bones, felt the acceptance they carried. When the ceremony ended, there was feasting. The band had prepared for days, and despite their limited resources, the spread was impressive. Venison and rabbit corn cakes, wild honey, fermented agave that made Emily's head spin after just one sip. She sat beside Standing Wolf, their shoulders touching as required by tradition, intensely aware of every point of contact. Yellow Moon approached them as the celebration continued, her face unreadable. Emily tensed, expecting another confrontation. But the woman simply placed a small basket at Emily's feet, beautifully woven, clearly hours of work. For new wife, Yellow Moon said stiffly in English, may your Wickiup know peace. It wasn't friendship, might never be, but it was acknowledgement. Emily inclined her head formally. Thank you. It is beautiful work. Yellow Moon moved away without another word, but Emily saw Standing Wolf relax slightly beside her. She accepts, Emily asked quietly. She accepts that fighting this brings only trouble, he replied. Sometimes that is enough. As the night wore on, Emily found herself actually enjoying parts of it. Spotted Dove taught her a simple dance that had everyone laughing at Emily's clumsy attempts. Little Fox, still limping but healing well, brought her a small carved horse he'd made. Even some of the warriors who had been most suspicious now nodded respectfully when they passed. But underneath the celebration was an awareness that this was partly performance, partly protection against the white world that wanted to rescue her. When Standing Wolf took her hand to lead her back to their Wickiup, now decorated with symbols of marriage, Emily felt the weight of everyone's expectations. Inside the Wickiup, alone for the first time since the ceremony, they stood awkwardly unsure how to navigate this new formality overlaying their fragile friendship. Nothing has changed, Standing Wolf said finally. Between us, nothing has changed. But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Something had shifted during the ceremony and the speaking of vows, even if they were partly pragmatic in the public claiming of each other. The careful distance they'd maintained seemed both more necessary and more difficult now. The soldiers, Emily asked, needing to focus on practical matters. Will this really stop them searching? Perhaps. If word spreads that you are married, not captive, they might lose interest. But Emily, he paused, clearly struggling with something. There may come a time when you must prove to whites that you are here by choice. Can you do that? Can you tell them you choose this over them? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Could she? Could she look at her own people and say she chose to stay with the Apache, who they feared and hated? I saved little Fox, she said slowly. Spotted Dove is my friend. Ghost Dancer is teaching me things my own mother never could. And you? She stopped, unsure how to finish. And me? You saved my life. You've protected me without taking anything in return. You've been more honorable than men who called themselves Christian gentlemen. So yes, if soldiers come, I will tell them I choose to stay. Standing Wolf was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. You humble me, Emily Carter. Emily? Standing Wolf, now apparently, she said with a weak attempt at humor. No, Apache women keep their own names. You are Emily Carter, who is wife to Standing Wolf. Your name is yours. It was a small thing, but somehow it mattered enormously. Thomas had insisted she become Emily Mason the day they married, erasing her identity into his. But here among people her culture called savage, she could keep herself. That night, lying on opposite sides of the wickiup, as always, Emily found herself thinking about choices and ceremonies and the strange paths life took. Through the thin barrier between them, she could hear Standing Wolf's breathing, not quite sleep, but not quite wake either. Standing Wolf, she whispered. Yes? Thank you for making the ceremony, for making it dignified. It could have been humiliating, but you didn't let it be. You are my wife now, even if only in public way. To humiliate you would be to humiliate myself. A pause. And you deserve dignity. You have earned it. Emily closed her eyes, feeling something dangerous warming in her chest. Respect was growing into something else, something she wasn't ready to name. But here in the darkness, with the sounds of the Apache camp settling into sleep around them, she could admit that being Standing Wolf's wife, even in name, only no longer felt like a prison sentence. It felt like possibility. The next morning brought the harsh reality of their situation crashing back. A scout rode in hard, his horse lathered with sweat. Soldiers were coming, following the actual trail this time, perhaps a day behind. Chief Nachi called immediate council. The band would have to leave this camp that had been safe for months. Emily watched the organized chaos as wickiups came down, belongings were packed, travois assembled. She worked alongside Singing Bird and Spotted Dove, her hands now skilled at the tasks that had seemed impossible weeks ago. Where will we go? She asked Standing Wolf as he prepared his weapons. Deeper into mountains. There are places soldiers cannot follow, paths only Apache know. He looked at her intently. It will be hard travel. Can you manage? I'll manage. But as they prepared to leave, another scout arrived with different news. The soldiers had a Mexican guide, someone who knew the hidden trails. And worse, they had Apache scouts from a rival band, enemies who would gladly lead soldiers to Chief Nachi's people. The mood in the camp shifted from urgent to grim. This wasn't just about moving, this was about potential battle. Women and children will go first, Chief Nachi ordered. Warriors will cover the trail. Standing Wolf pulled Emily aside. You go with Ghost Dancer. If fighting comes, if we do not follow, she knows where to take you. Take me? What about the others? The others are Apache. They know how to scatter and survive. You... He touched her face briefly, the first time he'd done so since the ceremony. You are still learning. Promise me you will stay with Ghost Dancer. And if you don't come back... His hand dropped. Then you will be widow again, but this time among people who will care for you. Ghost Dancer will see you safe either to another band or back to whites, if you choose. The casual way he discussed his potential death made Emily's chest tight. Don't die, she said fiercely. That's not allowed. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise maybe, or something warmer. I will try not to. But Emily, no. No final words, no goodbye speeches. You're going to follow us. We're going to reach these mountain paths, and everything will be fine." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "As my wife commands." The words were lightly said, but Emily heard the promise underneath. He would try. For her, he would try. The evacuation was swift and practiced, showing this wasn't the first time the band had fled soldiers. Emily found herself on a sturdy mare ghost dancer beside her on her own mount. Around them, women and children moved like ghosts through the desert, making far less noise than seemed possible for so many people. They had been traveling for perhaps 3 hours when they heard it, gunfire echoing through the canyons behind them. Emily started to turn back, but Ghost Dancer's weathered hand caught her wrist. "No, we do not stop. We do not look back. This is the way." But Standing Wolf is warrior. He knows what he does. You looking back, going back only makes his fight harder. So Emily rode on, her heart pounding with each distant crack of rifles. The gunfire went on for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, then stopped. The silence was almost worse than the noise. They climbed higher into the mountains, the paths becoming narrower, more treacherous. Emily's mare picked her way carefully along trails that seemed impossibly thin with drops that made Emily's stomach lurch. But Ghost Dancer led them surely, and by nightfall they had reached a sheltered valley with water and good defensive positions. The women set up a minimal camp. No fires, everyone listening for sounds of pursuit or return. Emily couldn't eat, couldn't rest, could only sit wrapped in a blanket staring at the path they'd taken, willing Standing Wolf to appear. It was near midnight when the warriors began to arrive. First came the scouts, then the main group, some wounded but all alive. Emily searched each face desperately, her heart sinking as the group seemed complete without Standing Wolf. Then, just as despair was taking hold, he emerged from the darkness, supporting a younger warrior who was bleeding from a shoulder wound. Emily was moving before she realized it, reaching them just as Standing Wolf lowered the injured man to the ground. "You're alive," she breathed. "As commanded," he replied, but she could see exhaustion in every line of his body. There was blood on his shirt, though she couldn't tell if it was his or the wounded warrior's. Emily's healing skills were needed then, and she pushed aside her relief to focus on treating wounds. The shoulder wound was bad, but clean a through shot that had missed anything vital. Others had grazes cuts from rock shrapnel where bullets had struck stone. Standing Wolf had a gash along his ribs that he hadn't mentioned, typical of his stoicism. As she cleaned and bound his wound, he told her quietly what had happened. The Apache scouts with the soldiers had indeed known some of their paths, but not all. The warriors had led them into a box canyon, then escaped up sides too steep for horses, while the soldiers were trapped below. Shots were exchanged, but the Apache's knowledge of the terrain had won the day. The Mexican guide, Emily asked, decided he did not want to die for soldier pay. Last we saw, he was riding hard for Mexico. And the Apache scouts? Standing Wolf's expression darkened. They will not guide soldiers again. Emily didn't ask for details. That night the band slept uneasily and their temporary camp guards posted at all approaches. Emily lay in her blankets near Standing Wolf. There had been no time or privacy to set up separate spaces. She could feel the heat from his body, hear his breathing still slightly labored from the day's exertions. "Emily," he said quietly in the darkness. "Yes. Today when you told me not to die, did you mean that?" She thought about lying about keeping things safe and distant between them, but they'd moved beyond safe when soldiers came hunting. "Yes, I meant it." "Why?" The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Emily could feel her heart beating too fast, knew he was probably waiting for her to retreat into careful friendship. But something about the day, the fear, the relief, the realization of how much his loss would hurt, made honesty impossible to avoid. "Because," she said carefully, "somewhere between you saving me from a sandstorm and me forbidding you to die, you became important to me. I don't know what that means yet, but yes, I meant it." His hand found hers in the darkness, calloused fingers, gentle. "You have become important to me too, Emily Carter. More than I expected. More than perhaps is wise." They held hands in the darkness, neither moving closer nor pulling away balanced on the edge of something that could change everything. Around them the camp slept fitfully, and somewhere in the distance coyotes sang to the stars. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious as spun glass. Finally, Standing Wolf squeezed her hand gently and let go. Sleep. Tomorrow we travel again, and it will be hard. But Emily lay awake long after his breathing deepened into sleep. Her hand still warm from his touch. Her mind turning over the implications of what they'd just admitted. Important to each other. It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't a crossing of the boundaries they'd so carefully maintained, but it was something. A crack in the wall, a door opening just slightly. Outside snow began to fall unseasonably early, covering their tracks and making pursuit impossible. Ghost Dancer, keeping watch, smiled to herself. The spirits worked in mysterious ways, but sometimes their intentions were as clear as fresh snow on old paths. The snow continued falling through the night, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost gentle, and by morning, the world had become unrecognizable. Emily woke to find Standing Wolf already gone, his warmth replaced by cold air that made her pull the blankets tighter. Through the Wikiup's entrance, she could see him with the other warriors studying the white blanketed terrain with expressions of both relief and concern. Early snow is blessing and curse, Ghost Dancer said, appearing at Emily's side with hot pine needle tea. Hides us from soldiers, but also makes hunting harder, traveling dangerous. Emily accepted the tea gratefully, its warmth spreading through her chest. How long will we stay here? Until Chief Nachi decides. Perhaps days, perhaps longer. This place is good water shelter, difficult for enemies to find. But food? Ghost Dancer shrugged. Food we must find or make last. The challenge became clear over the following days. The band's supplies, hastily packed during their flight, wouldn't sustain them long. The warriors went out daily despite the snow, returning sometimes with game, often with nothing. The women worked to preserve every scrap of meat gathered. Whatever plants remained unfrozen, stretched their corn and beans to feed everyone. Emily threw herself into the work with desperate energy, needing to be useful to contribute. She learned to identify edible roots beneath the snow, to set snares in places rabbits might travel, to make filling soup from bones others might discard. Her hands, once soft from her life as Thomas's wife, became rough and capable, no different from any Apache woman's. Standing Wolf watched her transformation with something that might have been pride. Their careful dance around each other continued, made more complex by their admission of importance, but somehow sweeter for it. He would bring her choice pieces from his hunts, a rabbit's haunch, the tender meat from a deer's back, and she would ensure his clothing was mended first, his moccasins waterproofed against the snow. You two circle each other like wolves afraid to mate. Yellow Moon observed one day, her tone more amused than hostile now. She had been teaching Emily to tan hides, the work brutal on hands, but necessary. Everyone sees it but you. Emily's face burned despite the cold. It's not. We have an understanding. Understanding, Yellow Moon snorted. Is that what whites call it, when a woman watches a man like hawk watches rabbit, and man pretends not to notice while watching her back? It's complicated. Love is simple. Fear makes it complicated. Yellow Moon's hands never paused in their work. You fear wanting Apache man makes you traitor to your people. He fears wanting white woman makes him weak. Both of you fools. Before Emily could respond, a commotion arose from the camp's edge. Scouts were returning, and they weren't alone. Emily recognized the figures with them, Apache, but not from their band. The strangers looked travel-worn, desperate, and among them were several children, one carried by her mother, clearly very ill. Chief Nachi emerged to meet them, the conversation rapid and tense in Apache. Emily caught fragments, something about soldiers burning death. Standing Wolf appeared at her elbow, his expression grim. What happened? Emily asked. Their camp was found by soldiers 3 days ago. These are all who survived. His jaw tightened. The soldiers burned their winter supplies, shot anyone who resisted. The child is dying from exposure. Without thinking, Emily moved toward the refugees. The mother holding the sick child looked up with hollow eyes beyond hope. The little girl, perhaps 4 years old, was burning with fever, her breathing shallow and labored. Let me help, Emily said in her broken Apache. then switched to gestures when words failed. The mother hesitated, looking to Chief Nachi, who nodded slowly. Emily examined the child quickly. Pneumonia most likely brought on by exposure and exhaustion. Without medicine, without proper shelter and warmth, the girl would die within hours. But Emily remembered something Ghost Dancer had taught her, a preparation made from willow bark and other plants that could reduce fever-ease breathing. Ghost Dancer, she called, "I need willow bark mullein pine needles, and honey if we have any." The old woman moved quickly, understanding immediately. Together they worked over the child, preparing the medicine, creating a steam tent with hot stones and water to help clear her lungs. Emily stayed with the girl through the night, adjusting the steam-spooning medicine between her lips, monitoring her fever. Standing, Wolf brought her food. She didn't eat water. She barely drank a blanket she didn't use. He stayed nearby translating when the mother spoke, helping to maintain the fire that heated the stones. "Why do you care so much?" he asked during the long dark hours. "She is not your child, not even your people." Emily looked at the small face flushed with fever but finally breathing easier. "She's a child. That's all that matters. When I was 8, I nearly died from pneumonia. A neighbor woman, an Irish immigrant my mother's friends called savage and papist, sat with me 3 days and nights, keeping me alive with old country remedies. My mother's Protestant friends wouldn't have dirtied their hands, but Mary O'Brien saved me anyway." She touched the child's forehead gently. "People are people, Standing Wolf. Children are children. The divisions we make, they're just stories we tell ourselves." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that made Emily's heart skip. "You shame me sometimes with your goodness." "I'm not good, I'm just—" She searched for words. "I'm just trying to be human." Perhaps that is the same thing. By dawn, the child's fever had broken. She would live, the recovery would be slow. The refugee mother wept with relief, grasping Emily's hands and speaking rapidly in Apache. Standing Wolf translated, his voice oddly thick. "She says you are true medicine woman, that the spirits work through your hands. She names you." He paused, seeming to consider how to translate "she names you," she who bridges waters, one who crosses between worlds to heal. The name spread through both groups quickly. The refugees were absorbed into Chief Nachi's band, their stories of soldier brutality, hardening faces already wary of whites. But they looked at Emily differently, this white woman who had fought death for an Apache child and won. That evening, as Emily finally collapsed in exhaustion, Standing Wolf sat beside her in their wickiup closer than usual. "You could have let the child die," he said quietly. "No one would have blamed you, not your child, not your responsibility." "Could you have," Emily asked, "could you have watched a child die and done nothing?" "Once, yes. My heart was stone after my family died. But now—" He looked at her directly. "Now you have changed things. Made me remember that hatred is poison, that choosing life is better than choosing death." "You told me that once." "Yes, but I had forgotten how to live it until I watched you live it." He reached out his fingers, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She who bridges waters. It suits you." The intimacy of the moment, his fingers against her skin, made Emily's breath catch. They were balanced on the edge of something had been for days, weeks even. All it would take was leaning forward, closing the distance. A shout from outside shattered the moment. Warriors were grabbing weapons, women pulling children close. Standing Wolf was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Emily followed, fear cold in her stomach. But it wasn't soldiers. A lone Apache warrior rode into camp, his horse nearly dead from exhaustion. He spoke urgently to Chief Nachi, gesturing back the way he'd come. Emily caught one word that made everyone tense: mangas coloradas. "What is it?" she asked Singing Bird. "Mangas coloradas calls for counsel. All bands. Something big happens." Singing Bird's face was worried. "When Great Chief calls, something very bad or very important comes." The debate that followed was intense. Taking the entire band to a large gathering was dangerous. So many Apache in one place would surely draw soldier attention. But refusing Mangas Colorado's call was unthinkable. He was the greatest of Apache war chiefs, the one even other chiefs deferred to. "We go?" Chief Nachi decided finally. All of us. If Mangas Coloradas calls, we answer. The journey took 4 days through increasingly difficult terrain. The snow had melted in the lower elevations, turning trails to mud, making travel exhausting. Emily rode between Spotted Dove and Ghost Dancer, part of the protected center of the group where women and children traveled. Standing Wolf ranged ahead with the scouts visible only occasionally when the trail switched back. On the third night, they camped by a river swollen with snowmelt. Emily was gathering water when she heard voices. White voices speaking English. She froze the water gourd forgotten in her hands. Through the trees, she could see them. 5 men, miners or prospectors from their appearance, all armed. They hadn't seen the Apache camp yet, but they were moving in that direction. Emily's mind raced. If she warned the band there would be killing, the miners would never be allowed to leave having seen the camp. But if she didn't warn them and the miners stumbled into the camp anyway, she made her decision. Moving carefully, she walked toward the miners, making noise so they would hear her coming. When they saw her, their eyes widened in shock. "Well, I'll be damned," one said. "A white woman out here." Emily let herself stumble, appearing weaker than she was. "Please," she gasped, "help me. I've been lost for days. My husband, Indians attacked our wagon." She let herself cry, not entirely acting as she thought of Thomas. "Apache?" another miner asked sharply, looking around nervously. "I don't know. It was so fast. I ran, got lost." Emily swayed, and one of the men caught her arm. "Please, is there a town nearby? Soldiers?" "Fort's 3 days north," the first miner said. "We can take you." "No." Emily pulled back. I heard them, the Indians. They're following the river north. That's why I came south. Please don't go that way." The miners exchanged looks. "How many?" "I don't know. Many. So many." Emily made her voice hysterical. "They had captives' children. They were terrible, laughing about what they'd done." That did it. The miners' faces hardened with disgust and fear. "We're heading to Tucson anyway," one decided. "South and west. You can come with us, ma'am." I can't travel more today. I'm so tired. Is there somewhere safe nearby? Somewhere I could rest until morning. Then maybe I could catch up." They pointed her toward an abandoned prospector's cabin 2 miles downstream, promised to wait for her there in the morning, then hurried away south, eager to put distance between themselves and the Apache threat she'd invented. Emily waited until they were gone, then ran back to camp. Standing Wolf met her at the edge, his face thunderous. "Where were you?" Spotted Dove said you went for water and disappeared. "There were miners," Emily said quickly. 5 of them coming this way. I led them off, sent them south." His anger shifted to something else. "You spoke to white men alone. I told them I was a survivor from a wagon attack that Apache were traveling north. They believed me, they're gone. And if they hadn't believed you, if they had taken you, then you would have been safe. The camp would have been safe." Standing Wolf grabbed her shoulders, his control finally breaking. "You little fool, you think I care more for safety than—" He stopped, breathing hard. "Then what?" Emily challenged her own emotions running high. "Then you," he said roughly. "You think I would choose the band's safety over yours?" "Yes, that's what you should do. That's what a warrior does. I am a man before I'm a warrior." He set his hands still on her shoulders. "And the man would burn the world to keep you safe." The words hung between them, raw and honest and dangerous. Emily reached up, touching his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "Standing Wolf." He pulled her against him, not kissing her, but holding her, his face buried in her hair. "Do not risk yourself like that again. I will not survive losing you." Emily held him back, feeling the solid warmth of him, the rapid beat of his heart. They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other for the first time, and Emily felt the last of her walls crumbling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think. I just acted." "That is your way," he said, pulling back enough to look at her face. "Acting without thinking when others are in danger. It is both your greatest strength and what will likely get you killed." "Standing Wolf." Chief Nachi's voice cut through the moment. He stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. He spoke in Apache, and Standing Wolf replied, his hands dropping from Emily's shoulders. "We move now." Standing Wolf translated. "The miners might return with others." As the band quickly broke camp and moved deeper into the mountains, Emily walked beside Standing Wolf in the darkness. Neither spoke of what had just happened, but something fundamental had changed. The careful distance was gone, replaced by awareness that hummed between them like lightning about to strike. They reached the great gathering place 2 days later, and Emily gasped at the sight. Hundreds of Apache had assembled in a vast canyon, more than she had imagined existed. Wickiups spread as far as she could see, smoke from countless fires rising into the sky. And at the center, on a natural stone platform, stood a man who could only be Mangas Coloradas. He was old but magnificent tall, even among the Apache, with presence that commanded attention absolutely. When he looked across the gathered bands, his gaze stopped on Emily, and she felt the weight of his assessment like a physical thing. "The white woman who is wife to Standing Wolf," he said in English, his voice carrying despite the distance. "Come forward." Emily's heart pounded as she walked through the crowd, Standing Wolf beside her. Hundreds of eyes followed their progress, some curious, many hostile. When they reached the platform, Mangas Colorada studied her with eyes that seemed to see through to her soul. "They say you saved Apache children. They say you sent white men away from our camps. They say you have become one of us." His voice was neutral, giving away nothing. "Is this true?" "I have tried to help where I could," Emily replied carefully. "And yet you are white. Your people kill us, take our land, poison our water. Why should we believe you are different?" Emily thought carefully before answering. "I don't ask you to believe anything. Look at my actions, not my skin. Judge me by what I do, not what others who look like me have done. And if I asked you to prove your loyalty, if I said you must choose between Apache and white, finally and forever." "I already have chosen," Emily said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I chose when I stayed after the trial. I chose when I married Standing Wolf. I choose every day when I wake up and work beside Apache." Women learn from Apache elders, heal Apache children. Mangas Coloradas was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, an expression that transformed his fierce face. "You speak well for a white woman, but words are wind. We shall see what you truly are when the test comes." He turned to address the gathered band, switching to Apache. The speech was long, passionate, and though Emily couldn't understand the words, she understood the tone. This was about war, about survival, about decisions that would shape the future of all Apache people. Standing Wolf translated quietly beside her. "He says the whites grow too many, too strong, that we must choose fight together or die separately. He calls for war, real war, not just raids." And Chief Nachi. "What does he think?" "He thinks war we cannot win is just another way to die." The debate that followed went on for hours, different chiefs and warriors speaking, some calling for war, others for negotiation, still others for withdrawal, deeper into lands whites didn't want. Emily noticed she wasn't the only white among the Apache. There were several Mexican captives, some who had clearly been with the Apache for years, fully integrated into the tribes. That night, as the council continued, Emily found herself sitting with a group of women from various bands. The conversation was mixed Spanish, Apache, and English, with much gesturing and laughter despite the serious matters being discussed by the men. "You are the one who married Standing Wolf," an older woman said in Spanish. "We wondered who would finally catch him." "More like he caught me," Emily replied in her limited Spanish, causing laughter. "He is good man," another woman added in broken English. "Lost much, but still good. You're lucky." "Why did he never marry before?" Emily asked, genuinely curious. The women exchanged glances. Finally, the older woman spoke again. "He loved once young, Mexican girl taken in raid when both were children. They grew up together, planned to marry. But soldiers came, killed her with many others. Standing Wolf." She made a gesture. Emily understood, closed, locked stone. "How long ago?" 6, 7 years. Long time to be alone. Emily thought about this as she watched Standing Wolf across the camp, deep in discussion with other warriors. He had loved and lost just as she had. Perhaps that was why they understood each other's careful distance, the fear of letting someone close enough to hurt you again. But they were already past that point, weren't they? The thought of losing him made her chest tight with panic. Somewhere between that sandstorm and now he had become essential to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. A commotion drew her attention. New riders were arriving, and from the reaction of the crowd they brought bad news. Standing Wolf appeared at her side, his face grim. "Soldiers," he said. "Many soldiers moving toward us. Someone betrayed the gathering place." Panic rippled through the assembled bands. This many Apache in one place, if the soldiers found them, it would be a massacre. Mangas Coloradas took control quickly, organizing the evacuation, sending bands in different directions to confuse pursuit. "We go west," Chief Nachi decided, "into the worst lands where soldiers cannot follow." As they prepared to leave, Emily noticed something that chilled her blood. Among the new arrivals was a white man, a traitor she recognized from the wagon train months ago. Samuel Morrison, who had always been kind to her, who had shared his coffee with her the morning after Thomas died. He was talking intently with some Apache scouts, pointing, gesturing, and Emily realized with horrible clarity he was the betrayer. He was selling the Apache location to the soldiers. She grabbed Standing Wolf's arm. "That man, the white traitor. I know him, he's—" But Standing Wolf had already noticed, as had others. The mood shifted dangerously. Morrison seemed to sense it, looking up, his eyes meeting Emily's across the distance. His face went white with shock. "Emily? Emily Carter, you're alive." His voice carried, and suddenly everyone was looking at her. Morrison pushed forward through the crowd, reaching for her. "Thank God we thought you were dead. I've come to save you. The soldiers are coming, but I can get you out." "Don't touch her," Standing Wolf said, stepping between them, his voice deadly quiet. Morrison's eyes widened as he took in the scene, Emily in Apache dress, Standing Wolf protective beside her, the clear connection between them. "Dear God, what have they done to you?" "They saved my life," Emily said clearly. "Which is more than you or anyone else from the wagon train did." "Emily, you don't understand. You've been traumatized. These savages, these people," Emily interrupted, "are my family now, and you're betraying them to the soldiers." Morrison's face hardened. "I'm saving you. All of you if you'd let me. The soldiers will give safe passage to any Apache who surrender move to the reservation peacefully." "Liar," someone spat, and Emily wasn't sure if it was her or one of the Apache women. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Warriors were reaching for weapons. Morrison was backing away, and Emily could see how this would end blood and death and confirmation of every terrible thing whites believed about Apache. "Wait," she said loudly in Apache, then repeated it in English and Spanish. "Let me handle this." Chief Nachi looked at her thoughtfully, then at Mangas Coloradas, who nodded slowly. "The white woman wishes to speak. Let her speak." Emily stepped forward, moving past Standing Wolf's protective reach. "Samuel, you need to leave. Now. Tell the soldiers you were wrong. The Apache have moved on. There's nothing here." "I can't do that, Emily. There are hundreds of hostiles here. It's my duty." "Your duty?" Emily laughed bitterly. "Like it was your duty to help a widow on the trail. You gave me coffee once," Samuel then stood by while the others pushed me out. "Don't pretend you're here for duty. You're here for the bounty the army pays for Apache scalps." Morrison flushed. "That's not—" "Emily, you're confused. These people have filled your head with lies." "The only lies I've heard have come from whites," Emily said. She made a decision then, one that would change everything. "If you bring soldiers here, Samuel, I'll tell them you're a traitor who sells guns to Apache. I'll tell them about the rifles you sold to Cochise's band last spring." Morrison went pale. "You don't know anything about that." "Don't I?" "Your partner, Benjamin Hayes, told me all about it one night when he was drunk. How you play both sides, selling information to the army and guns to the Apache." It was a guess based on fragments of overheard conversation, but from Morrison's expression, she'd hit truth. "You wouldn't. You're a white woman, a Christian. I'm Standing Wolf's wife," Emily said firmly. "And if you bring soldiers here, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Samuel Morrison really is." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Morrison spat at her feet. "Apache whore. You'll regret this when they turn on you. They always turn on whites eventually." He left then quickly, and Emily knew he would bring the soldiers anyway, but she'd bought them time, sown doubt that might make the soldiers hesitate question. As the band scattered into the night, Mangus Colorado stopped beside Emily. "You chose," he said simply. "When the test came, you chose. Remember that white woman who is Apache. In the dark times coming, remember you chose." Chief Nachi's band traveled hard through the night, pushing deep into barren lands where water was scarce and game scarcer. By dawn, they had put significant distance between themselves and the gathering place, but everyone knew it wasn't enough. Soldiers with Apache scouts could track them anywhere. "We need to disappear," Chief Nachi said. "Become as ghosts until soldiers tire of searching." They split into smaller groups, each taking different paths to a predetermined meeting place. Emily found herself with Standing Wolf's group, about 20 people including ghost dancer Spotted Dove, and her children and several warriors. They moved like shadows through the desert, using every trick of concealment the Apache knew. On the third day, exhausted and low on water, they reached a hidden canyon with a small spring. As they set up a minimal camp, Standing Wolf pulled Emily aside. "What you did with Morrison? It was brave. It was necessary. He will want revenge now. You made an enemy." Emily shrugged. "I seem to be good at that." Standing Wolf touched her face gently. "You are good at many things, she who bridges waters, including making a stubborn Apache warrior feel things he thought dead." Standing Wolf: "When this is over, when we are safe, we need to speak of things. Real things, not careful dances around truth." Emily knotted her throat tight with emotion. "Yes, we do." But safety seemed an impossible dream. The next morning, scouts reported soldiers everywhere, a net closing around the scattered Apache bands. Some groups had been caught, forced onto reservations, or killed resisting. The old life, the free life, was ending. "We could go to Mexico," someone suggested. "Join the bands there, and live as beggars on land not ours." Chief Nachi shook his head. "Better to die here than live in shame there." "There is another way," Emily said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "My sister Martha has a ranch in California in the Sierras. Remote, isolated. She married a Mexican rancher. They have no love for the army. Some of us could go there. Not forever, just until things calm down." The silence was deafening. Finally, Standing Wolf spoke. "You would take Apache to your sister. My family now is Apache. Martha will understand. She always was different like me." It was a desperate plan full of risk, but as they discussed it, it began to seem possible. A small group could travel as Mexican laborers with their families, Emily's white face, their protection at checkpoints. It wouldn't save everyone, but it might save some. "I will not run to white woman's charity," one warrior said proudly. "Then stay and die with honor," Ghost Dancer said sharply, "but do not condemn children to die for your pride." In the end, 15 agreed to try, mostly women and children, a few wounded warriors, Ghost Dancer, despite her age. Chief Nachi would take the rest deeper into Mexico, hoping to preserve something of the old ways. The parting was tearful. Emily embraced Singing Bird, who had chosen to go with Chief Nachi. "You taught me so much." "You taught us too," Singing Bird replied, "that not all whites are evil, that bridges can be built. It is an important lesson, even if learned too late." As they prepared to leave, Chief Nachi approached Emily. "Take care of Standing Wolf. He has found something with you he thought lost forever." "I will," Emily promised. The journey to California was a nightmare of close calls and constant fear. They traveled at night when possible, hid during day. Emily's story, that she was a missionary's widow helping relocated Mexican Apache families, barely held up under scrutiny. Twice they were stopped by army patrols, and both times Emily's white face and educated English were all that saved them. Standing Wolf chafed at the deception, at having to lower his eyes and play the broken Indian. But he did it for the children, for the elders, for the chance at survival. Finally, after 3 weeks of travel, they saw the Sierra Nevada rising before them. Martha's ranch was another day's ride, nestled in a valley with good water and natural protection. Emily's heart pounded as they approached the familiar gates. She hadn't seen her sister in 3 years, since before she'd married Thomas. Martha came out of the house at the sound of horses, her rifle ready. Then she saw Emily, and the rifle fell from nerveless fingers. Emily, oh my God, Emily. The sisters embraced, both crying, and Emily felt something in her chest finally ease. She was alive against all odds. She had found family in the most unexpected place, and now somehow she had brought her two families together. Martha, Emily said, pulling back. I need your help. We need your help. Martha looked at the ragged group of Apache at Standing Wolf, standing protective near Emily, and understanding dawned in her eyes. You married an Apache. I did. And these are our people. They need sanctuary. Martha was quiet for a long moment, then she smiled. Well then, welcome to Rancho Esperanza, all of you. As the Apache began to set up camp in a sheltered area, Martha indicated Emily stood with Standing Wolf, looking out over the valley that would be their refuge. It wasn't the ending any of them had imagined, but it was life. It was possibility. So, Standing Wolf said quietly, now we have time for that conversation. Emily turned to him, seeing in his eyes everything they'd been dancing around for months. Yes, she said. Now we have time. The first weeks at Rancho Esperanza were a delicate dance of adjustment and mistrust. Martha's husband, Diego Esperanza, had initially been shocked by the Apache presence, but his own history as a Mexican who'd lost family to American expansion made him sympathetic to their plight. He allocated the northern pasture for their camp, far enough from the main ranch operations to avoid scrutiny from occasional visitors, but close enough for protection and supplies. Emily found herself caught between worlds, more than ever translating not just languages, but entire ways of being. The Apache were wary of charity-proud people, reduced to accepting sanctuary, while Martha struggled to understand how her educated Boston sister had become someone who dressed in buckskin and spoke Apache more fluently than English some days. You've changed so much, Martha said one evening as they prepared dinner together in the ranch kitchen. It was strange for Emily to be back in a proper house with wooden floors and glass windows after months in wickiups. Mother would be scandalized. Mother was scandalized when I married Thomas and came west, Emily replied, kneading bread with practiced hands. I imagine this would have killed her outright. Do you love him, Standing Wolf? Martha's voice was carefully neutral. Emily's hands stilled. Did she love him? They still hadn't had that conversation he'd mentioned, both too exhausted from the journey and too overwhelmed by their new circumstances to confront what lay between them. But watching him work with Diego's vaqueros, seeing him swallow his warrior's pride to learn ranch work, witnessing his gentle patience with the children who were struggling to adapt, yes, she loved him. The realization wasn't sudden, but rather like acknowledging something that had been true for so long she'd forgotten when it started. Yes, she said simply, though we've never spoken of it directly. Why not? Because we married by force of circumstance. Because admitting love makes it real, and real things can be lost. Emily's voice caught. I've lost enough. Martha pulled her into an embrace. Oh, Emily, love is the only thing worth the risk of loss. That evening, Emily found Standing Wolf sitting alone on a ridge overlooking the valley, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. She settled beside him, their shoulders touching. Diego says you learn quickly, she said, that you have natural skill with horses. Horses make sense. They are honest. If they fear you, they show it. If they trust you, that too is clear. He paused. Unlike people. Am I not clear? He turned to look at her, and Emily's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. You are the least clear person I have known. You say one thing with words, another with actions, and something else entirely with your eyes. What do my eyes say now? Standing Wolf studied her face for a long moment. They say you are afraid, but I do not know of what. Emily took a breath, gathering courage she'd used to face sandstorms and soldiers and hostile Apache women. I'm afraid that what I feel for you is too much too fast, that I'm betraying Thomas's memory by loving again so soon, that you still see me as an obligation from an old law rather than... She trailed off. Rather than what? His voice was gentle. rather than the woman who loves you desperately and has been too cowardly to say it. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind through pine trees and distant cattle. Then Standing Wolf reached out his fingers, intertwining with hers. "When my first love died," he said quietly, "I thought my heart died too. For years I felt nothing but anger. Then you fell against me in a sandstorm, and something I thought dead began to wake. I fought it. A white woman who would leave at first chance, who could never truly be Apache, it was foolish to feel anything." He squeezed her hand. "But you stayed. You saved Little Fox. You stood between our people and soldiers. You became Apache in ways that matter more than blood. And somewhere in all of that, my obligation became my choice, and my choice became my love." Emily turned to face him fully. "Say it plainly. No more dancing around truth. I love you, Emily Carter, who is she who bridges waters. I love your stubborn courage and your healing hands and the way you mutter in English when frustrated. I love that you gave up your world for mine, even though mine is ending." "It's not ending," Emily said fiercely. "It's changing. We're proof that it can change and survive." She touched his face. "I love you too, Standing Wolf. Not because law says I must not, because I have nowhere else to go, but because you saw me at my lowest and gave me dignity. Because you protected me without diminishing me. Because you're the strongest, most honorable man I've known." He pulled her against him, then their first real embrace without crisis or danger driving it, and kissed her with months of suppressed longing. Emily felt something break free in her chest, some last wall crumbling, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Standing Wolf rested his forehead against hers. "So what now, wife, who chose to be wife?" "Now we make this real," Emily said. "All of it. The marriage, the life together, the future. If you're willing." "I have been willing since you forbade me to die," he said with a slight smile. "It just took time for you to see it." That night, for the first time, they truly shared their space as husband and wife. The careful distance dissolved into tender intimacy, two damaged people finding wholeness in each other. Outside, Ghost Dancer smiled to herself, hearing Emily's soft laughter through the walls. The spirits had indeed known what they were doing. The following weeks brought new challenges. Word spread among the local Mexican-American community about the Apache refugees, and reactions were mixed. Some, like Diego's vaqueros, were sympathetic. They too had lost lands to American expansion. Others were fearful, remembering old raids and conflicts. The situation came to a head when Samuel Morrison arrived at the ranch. Emily was working in the garden with Spotted Dove when she saw him riding up the main road accompanied by an army lieutenant and 4 soldiers. Her blood turned to ice. "Get Standing Wolf," she told Spotted Dove urgently. "Tell everyone to hide, now." Emily smoothed her dress. She'd been wearing regular clothes more often to help maintain their cover, and walked toward the house, intercepting the men before they could get too close. "Samuel," she said coolly. "Lieutenant, what brings you to my sister's ranch?" Morrison's face was hard with satisfaction. "Got reports of Apache raiders in the area. Thought we should check on you ladies, make sure you're safe." "How thoughtful," Martha said, emerging from the house with Diego and several armed vaqueros. "But as you can see, we're quite safe." The lieutenant, a young man who looked uncomfortable with the situation, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we've had reports that Apache fugitives might be hiding on ranches in the area. We need to search the property." "On whose authority?" Diego asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The United States Army," the lieutenant began, "has no authority on a Mexican land-grant ranch unless you have a warrant," Diego interrupted. "This land was deeded to my family by the Mexican government before your country stole half of Mexico. Your own treaty guarantees our property rights." Morrison's face flushed. "Emily, I know they're here. I know you're hiding them. That savage you call a husband." "My husband is dead," Emily said flatly. "Killed by Apache 3 months ago. I barely survived myself. If you've come all this way to torment a widow with wild accusations, you're even lower than I thought." The lie came easily, had been rehearsed for just such an occasion. Standing Wolf was listed as dead in the Army records, killed in the same skirmish where several soldiers had died. One of the warriors had taken his identity papers, letting the Army find them on a body too damaged to identify clearly. "You're lying," Morrison snarled. "I saw you with him at the gathering." You saw me as a captive trying to survive, Emily interrupted. Or did you tell the lieutenant how you were at an illegal trading meeting with hostile Apache? How you've been selling them guns? The lieutenant's eyes sharpened, looking at Morrison with new interest. Mr. Morrison, you said you had reliable intelligence. She's lying. She's become one of them. A grieving widow who's been traumatized by Apache captivity. Martha stepped forward, every inch the protective older sister. Lieutenant, my sister has been through hell. She's only recently recovered enough to speak of her ordeal. If Mr. Morrison is harassing her based on delusions from her captivity... The lieutenant looked increasingly uncomfortable. This wasn't what he'd been told to expect. Ma'am, if we could just look around briefly. Not without a warrant, Diego repeated firmly. His vaqueros shifted slightly, hands near weapons, and the lieutenant noticed they outnumbered his small patrol 3-1. I see. The lieutenant turned to Morrison. Mr. Morrison, without more concrete evidence, I cannot search private property. These people have rights under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Morrison's face was purple with rage. You're making a mistake. They're harboring hostiles, I know it. What you know and what you can prove are different things, the lieutenant said coldly. He tipped his hat to the ladies. Our apologies for the disturbance. We'll be going now. As they rode away, Morrison looked back at Emily with pure hatred. This wasn't over, his expression said. Not by far. That night, the Apache refugees held council. The close call had shaken everyone, and there was talk of leaving, finding somewhere else. Where? Ghost Dancer asked practically. Where is safe for Apache now? Mexico, one warrior suggested. Deep in the Sierra Madre where whites never go. To live as beggars and thieves, Standing Wolf said. Here we have work food shelter. The children can learn new ways while keeping old ones. Your white wife has made us weak. Yellow Moon said she had been among the refugees, her antagonism toward Emily never fully fading, hiding behind her skirts, denying who we are. My wife has kept us alive, Standing Wolf said sharply. Or would you prefer an honorable death to a difficult life? Sometimes, yes, Yellow Moon replied honestly. Emily stood then, surprising everyone by speaking in fluent Apache. Months of immersion had made her nearly as comfortable in their language as English. I understand the shame of taking charity of hiding who you are, but look at your children. Look at little Fox at Spotted Dove's daughters. Do they deserve death for your pride? This ranch is not forever, but it's time for children to grow strong, for wounds to heal, for the world to change again. And it will change. It always does. Pretty words from someone who can return to White World whenever she chooses, Yellow Moon said bitterly. Can I? Emily looked around the circle. Where would I go? My own people think I'm ruined, a woman who lay with savages. The army thinks I'm a traitor. The Apache accept me only because Standing Wolf claimed me. She met Yellow Moon's eyes directly. We're all refugees here. All of us are caught between worlds. The question is whether we survive together or die apart. The debate continued late into the night, but eventually the decision was made to stay at least through winter. Diego had offered work to those who wanted it, the ranch needed hands, and Apache knew horses better than most. It wasn't the free life of following seasons and buffalo, but it was life. As the months passed, a strange new community formed. The Apache children played with the Mexican vaqueros' children, all of them brown-skinned and bilingual, creating a mixture of languages and cultures that would have horrified purists on all sides. Emily started a small school teaching English and writing to anyone who wanted to learn, while Ghost Dancer taught traditional Apache skills to keep them from being lost. Standing Wolf became Diego's most valued horse trainer, his understanding of the animals almost mystical. He and Emily had moved into a small cabin on the property close enough to the Apache camp to maintain connection, but private enough to build their own life. It was in that cabin on a cold December night that Emily told him she was pregnant. Standing Wolf went completely still, his hand frozen halfway to his coffee cup. You are certain? Ghost Dancer confirmed it. I'm about 2 months along. A range of emotions crossed his face, joy, fear, wonder, worry, before settling on something like awe. He moved to kneel beside her chair, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. A child, our child. Are you happy? Emily asked anxiously. They'd never discussed children, the future too uncertain for such plans. Happy. Standing Wolf looked up at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. After my family died, I thought my line would end with me, that everything I was would die unmourned. But now, he pulled her down into his arms. Now there will be someone who carries both our bloods, both our worlds. How could I be anything but grateful? The pregnancy changed things. Standing Wolf became even more protective, which Emily found both endearing and frustrating. The Apache women rallied around her, even Yellow Moon offering grudging advice about herbs to ease morning sickness. Martha was ecstatic, already planning baby clothes and nursery furniture. But Samuel Morrison hadn't given up. The attacks started, small cattle disappeared, fences were cut, water sources were poisoned. Diego knew it was harassment, trying to force them to give up the Apache refugees, but proving it was another matter. Then came the night raid. Emily woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of gunfire. The barn was ablaze, horses screaming in terror. Standing Wolf was already up, grabbing his rifle. "Stay here," he ordered. "Like hell," Emily replied, reaching for her own weapon. They emerged to chaos. Armed men, not soldiers but hired thugs, were attacking the Apache camp. The warriors were fighting back, but they were outnumbered. Emily saw Little Fox's mother fall, clutching her shoulder, and rage filled her. She fired at the attackers, her shots careful and deliberate, Thomas's long-ago lessons serving her well. Beside her, Standing Wolf was deadly efficient, dropping men with precision. Diego and his vaqueros joined the fight, turning the tide. But in the confusion, Emily didn't see the man approaching from behind until Standing Wolf shouted her name. She turned to see Morrison himself, his gun aimed at her heart. "Should have accepted rescue when you had the chance," he snarled. The gunshot was deafening. Emily waited for the pain, but it didn't come. Instead, Morrison felt a red stain spreading across his chest. Behind him stood Martha, her smoking rifle still raised. "Nobody's," Martha said firmly, "threatens my pregnant sister." The remaining attackers fled, leaving their dead behind. The cost was high, 2 Apache warriors dead, several wounded, including Standing Wolf, who'd taken a bullet in the shoulder. The barn was destroyed, dozens of horses lost. But they had survived, and Morrison was dead. When the sheriff came to investigate, he found clear evidence that Morrison had hired the raiders, including a half-burned letter in his pocket outlining the plan. The official story was that criminals had attacked the ranch and been repelled by the residents. No mention was made of Apache. Standing Wolf's shoulder healed slowly, tended by both Emily and Ghost Dancer. The wound wasn't serious, but it reminded them all how precarious their safety was. "We should leave," he said one evening, as Emily changed his bandages. "Find somewhere safer for you and the baby." "Where?" Emily asked, echoing Ghost Dancer's earlier question. "Standing Wolf, there is nowhere truly safe for us. At least here we have family support. Our child will have aunts and uncles, grandparents, and Ghost Dancer, and Diego's parents. That's worth fighting for." He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "When did you become so wise?" "When I married an Apache warrior who taught me that choosing life is always better than choosing death." Spring came with new life and new challenges. Emily's pregnancy progressed, her belly rounding as the baby grew. She continued her work teaching school, helping with medical needs, serving as translator and mediator between the Apache and the growing number of Mexican-American workers Diego hired. It was a delicate balance. The Apache maintained their own identity, their own customs, but slowly adapted to ranch life. Some of the younger men joined Diego's cattle drives, earning their own wages. The women sold their basketwork and beadwork in town through Martha, who claimed to have Mexican craftswomen creating the pieces. Ghost Dancer watched it all with knowing eyes. "This is how we survive," she told Emily one day as they prepared medicines together. "Not by fighting the river, but by learning to flow with it while keeping our essence. You showed us this way." "I didn't mean to show anyone anything," Emily said. "I was just trying to survive." "The best teachers never mean to teach," Ghost Dancer replied. "They just live truth and others see." As Emily's time approached, anxiety grew in the camp. A mixed-blood child, especially one with white and Apache heritage, would face challenges from all sides. Some Apaches still harbored resentment about diluting their bloodlines, while the white world would see the child as tainted. Standing Wolf grew increasingly protective and increasingly worried. "What if the child looks Apache?" he asked one night. "How will you explain that in town?" "I'll say my husband was Mexican," Emily replied practically. "Diego's already spread that story that I married one of his cousins who died. It's close enough to truth. And if the child looks white, then we say the father was white. Standing Wolf, we can't control what people think. We can only love our child and teach them to be strong enough to live between worlds." Her labor began on a hot June night, the air heavy with the promise of summer storms. Ghost Dancer and Martha attended her, their combined knowledge of traditional and modern birthing techniques a comfort. Standing Wolf paced outside like a caged mountain cat, driving everyone crazy with his anxiety. The labor was long and difficult. Emily had helped deliver babies, but experiencing it herself was entirely different. The pain came in waves that threatened to drown her, and several times she wondered if she would survive. "Apache women birth warriors," Ghost Dancer said firmly when Emily cried out. "You are Apache woman. You birth survivor." After 14 hours as dawn broke over the mountains, Emily's child was born. A son with his father's dark hair but his mother's blue eyes, his skin a golden brown that could pass for either Mexican or sun-touched white depending on who was looking. Standing Wolf was allowed in, then his face a mixture of wonder and terror as Ghost Dancer placed the baby in his arms. "My son," he whispered, in Apache, then English, then Spanish, as if claiming the child in all the languages of his world. "What should we name him?" Emily asked, exhausted but euphoric. "James," Standing Wolf said unexpectedly. "James Thomas. Standing Wolf Carter." Emily's eyes filled with tears. James for her father, Thomas for her first husband. Standing Wolf for his heritage, Carter for hers. It was perfect, a name that bridged all their worlds. "In Apache?" she asked. "Wind Rider." Standing Wolf said after consideration, "For he will need to ride the winds of change." The baby's presence changed the dynamic at the ranch. Even the most skeptical Apache softened at the sight of the child who carried their future in his mixed blood. The Mexican workers cooed over him, calling him Guerrito for his light eyes. Martha was besotted, spending every free moment with her nephew. But the outside world intruded again when an unexpected visitor arrived, an Apache scout from the reservation bringing news that Chief Nachi had been captured and was being held at Fort Grant. The army was offering a deal if the renegade Apache turned themselves in. Peacefully, Chief Nachi would be released, and they would all be given land on the reservation together. The debate that night was fierce. Some wanted to attempt a rescue, others to accept the offer, still others to ignore it and remain hidden. "It's a trap," Yellow Moon argued. "They promise land, then give us desert where nothing grows." "Chief Nachi would not want us to risk ourselves for him," an elder argued. Standing Wolf was torn. Chief Nachi was like a father to him, but he had a son now, a wife, responsibilities beyond warrior honor. Emily listened to the arguments, then spoke. "What if we negotiate not all of us turning ourselves in, but some going to the reservation voluntarily with guarantees? Diego has connections, even some influence with the territorial governor. We could ensure decent land supplies protection from corrupt agents." "You would split us up," Yellow Moon accused. "We're already split," Emily pointed out. "Chief Nachi's group, those who went to Mexico, us here. At least this way some could live openly as Apache again, not hiding who they are." It took weeks of careful negotiation through Diego's contacts, but eventually a deal was struck. Those who wanted could go to a section of the San Carlos reservation that had water and decent grazing with Chief Nachi as their recognized leader. Diego would have contracts to supply beef to the reservation, ensuring fair prices and quality. Those who wanted to stay at the ranch could remain as workers. The day of departure was emotional. About half chose to go, including Yellow Moon, who surprised Emily by embracing her before leaving. "You are strange woman Emily Carter," Yellow Moon said. "But you saved us when we needed saving. I will tell Chief Nachi his grandson has strong mother." Ghost Dancer chose to stay, claiming she was too old for another journey. In truth, Emily knew she stayed to help raise James to ensure he knew his Apache heritage. As they watched the departing group disappear into the distance, Standing Wolf pulled Emily close, baby James sleeping against his chest. "Regrets?" Emily asked. "No. Chief Nachi would understand. We each must find our own path to survival." He looked down at their son. "His path will be different from ours, harder maybe, but he will have something we didn't choice." That autumn brought unexpected joy when Spotted Dove married one of Diego's vaqueros, a kind man named Carlos, who adored her children as his own. The wedding was a mixture of Apache Mexican and American traditions that would have scandalized purists, but felt perfectly right for their small, mixed community. Emily stood as witness for Spotted Dove wearing the doeskin dress from her own Apache ceremony, now adorned with Mexican silver and American trade beads, a perfect symbol of their blended world. "We are creating something new," Ghost Dancer observed, watching Apache children play games taught by Mexican grandmothers while being called to dinner in English. Not Apache, not Mexican, not white, but something that is all and none. "Is that good?" Emily asked, worried about what world they were creating for James. "It is what is," Ghost Dancer replied pragmatically. "The old world is ending. We can mourn it, or we can help shape what comes next." As winter approached, Emily received an unexpected letter. It was from a lawyer in San Francisco, informing her that Thomas's uncle had died and left his estate to his nephew's widow. The amount was modest, but significant enough to buy land to build something. "We could leave," Standing Wolf said when she told him. "Go somewhere where no one knows us, start fresh." Emily looked around their small cabin at James sleeping in his cradle, decorated with Apache beadwork and Mexican crosses at the view of mountains where their people had found sanctuary. "We are home," she said firmly. "This money, we use it to buy land adjoining the ranch. Create a place where Apache can live and work without hiding, where children like James can grow up proud of all their heritage." Standing Wolf smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "My wife, the dreamer. My husband, the one who taught me dreams can become real." They purchased 40 acres of rough land that bordered both the ranch and the reservation boundary. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, deeded jointly to Emily Carter, and Standing Wolf officially listed as deceased, but legally recognized through Diego's creative paperwork. As they stood on their own land for the first time, James in Emily's arms, reaching for the eagle feather in Standing Wolf's hair, Emily thought about the strange journey that had brought them here. From a sandstorm that should have killed her to a forced marriage that became real love from hiding their identity to creating a place where identity could be fluid and multiple. "No regrets?" Standing Wolf asked, echoing her earlier question. Emily kissed him, then their son, then looked out over the land that would be their children's inheritance, not just the acreage, but the proof that different peoples could build something together. "No regrets," she said. "Only gratitude." Retry. The winter that followed was the harshest anyone could remember, with snow falling even in the valley, where such things were rare. James had just begun to walk, his chubby legs unsteady, but determined when the fever struck the ranch. It started with the vaqueros' children, then spread to the Apache camp, and finally reached their small cabin on a night when the wind howled like grieving spirits. Emily recognized the signs immediately: the spotted rash, the high fever, the delirium. Measles. For adults who'd survived childhood exposure, it was manageable. For those who'd never encountered it, especially the Apache who had no immunity to European diseases, it was deadly. "We need to quarantine," Emily told Standing Wolf urgently as she checked James for symptoms. Their son was burning with fever, his usual babbling silenced. "Keep the sick separated, boil all waterborne contaminated clothing." Standing Wolf's face was grim. "How many will die?" "I don't know, but we fight for everyone." The next weeks were a blur of exhaustion and grief. Emily and Ghost Dancer worked tirelessly, moving between patients, mixing medicines from both traditions: willow bark and aspirin, traditional smoke treatments and modern ventilation techniques. Martha helped when she could, but she had her own household to protect. Diego sent to town for a doctor, but the man took one look at the Apache patients and declared it God's judgment on heathens. Emily threw him out bodily, her fury giving her strength despite days without sleep. "Get out before I show you God's judgment on cowards." Standing Wolf caught her as she swayed, guiding her to sit. You cannot save everyone, Emily. You will kill yourself trying. I have to try. These are our people. James needs... She broke off as their son whimpered in his fever dreams. 3 children died in the first week. Emily held their mothers as they wept, her own tears mixing with theirs. Little Fox, the boy she'd saved from the mountain cat, fought hard but grew weaker daily. Emily spent an entire night breathing steam into his lungs, forcing medicine down his throat, whispering prayers in English and Apache, and languages she didn't even realize she knew. When his fever finally broke when he opened his eyes and asked for water in a cracked voice, Emily collapsed. Standing Wolf carried her to their bed where she slept for 18 hours straight while he and Ghost Dancer continued the fight. James recovered slowly but completely, though Emily would wake in panic for months afterward, checking his breathing in the darkness. Of the 43 who caught the disease, 8 died a better survival rate than most Apache communities facing measles, but each death felt like a personal failure to Emily. You did everything possible, Ghost Dancer told her as they prepared bodies for burial in the Apache way. Without you, we would have lost 3 times as many. It's not enough. There has to be a better way. Vaccination prevention. Emily's voice broke. Our children shouldn't die from preventable diseases. It was this crisis that sparked Emily's next transformation. She wrote to medical colleagues of her mother in Boston, begging for information about smallpox vaccination, measles prevention, any medical knowledge that could help. Most ignored her letters. A woman practicing medicine among savages wasn't worth their time. But one Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman to receive a medical degree in America, responded with packages of medical texts and supplies. You do God's work. Dr. Blackwell wrote, regardless of the color of your patient's skin. Enclosed are instructions for basic vaccination. Use them wisely. Emily studied the texts with the intensity she'd once reserved for her mother's gardens, learning about germ theory, antiseptic procedures, vaccination techniques. Standing Wolf would find her asleep over medical journals, candle burned to nothing, James playing quietly with his carved horses beside her. Spring brought healing and unexpected visitors. A group of Apache from the San Carlos Reservation arrived, led by none other than Chief Nachi himself. He was older, thinner, marked by his time in captivity, but his presence still commanded respect. Emily and Standing Wolf greeted him, formally presenting James, who toddled forward with the fearlessness of toddlers everywhere. Chief Nachi's weathered face softened as he lifted his grandson, speaking to him in Apache. He has your eyes, he told Emily, but his spirit is Apache. I see it in how he moves, fearless and curious. That evening, Chief Nachi shared the reality of reservation life, the corrupt agents stealing supplies, the prohibition against traditional ceremonies, the slow death of Apache culture under government rules. Some adapt, he said. Learn white ways, send children to white schools. Others resist and starve. Both paths lead to the end of who we are. There's another path, Emily said quietly. What we're building here. Not pure Apache, not pure white, but something new that preserves what matters while adapting to survive. Chief Nachi studied her for a long moment. You believe this? I see it every day. James speaks Apache and English and Spanish. He knows Ghost Dancer's stories and Martha's hymns. He is all of these things without being less Apache. The whites will never accept him. Some won't, Emily agreed, but some will. And more importantly, he'll accept himself. That's what we're creating, a generation that doesn't have to choose one identity, that can be whole in their multiplicity. Chief Nachi was quiet for a long time, watching James play with both Apache children and Mexican ones, the boundaries invisible to their young eyes. Perhaps, he said finally, there is wisdom in this bridge you build. He stayed for a week, and in that time something shifted. He gave Standing Wolf his blessing to live this new way to raise James between worlds. More surprisingly, he suggested that some young Apache from the reservation might come to work at the ranch to learn new skills while maintaining connection to their culture. We cannot fight the river, he said, echoing Ghost Dancer's earlier words, but we can direct our course within it. After he left, Standing Wolf was quiet for days, processing the reconciliation with his chief, the validation of the path they'd chosen. Finally, one evening, as they watched James chase fireflies, he spoke. "I never thought he would understand. I prepared for anger, disappointment, perhaps exile." "He's a leader," Emily replied. "True leaders adapt to serve their people's needs, not their own pride." "Like you," Standing Wolf said, pulling her close. "You could have returned to white society after Morrison died, reclaimed respectability. Instead, you stay building something that may never be fully accepted by anyone." "I stay because this is my family. You, James, Ghost Dancer, all of them. This is where I belong." That sense of belonging was tested when Martha announced she was pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult from the start, and the doctor from town was useless, insisting only on bed rest and prayer. Emily took over her sister's care, combining traditional remedies with what she'd learned from Dr. Blackwell's texts. "You should be a real doctor," Martha said one afternoon as Emily examined her. "You have the knowledge, the skill." "No medical school would accept me now. A woman who lived with Apache, who has a half-breed child, they'd laugh me out of the building." "Then we make our own school," Martha said firmly. "Here teaching what you know to whoever wants to learn." The idea seemed impossible, but it planted itself in Emily's mind like a persistent weed. She was already teaching basic medical care to the Apache women and some of the vaqueros' wives. Why not formalize it? Martha's labor came early on a night when Diego was away on a cattle drive. The baby was breech refusing to turn despite Emily's efforts. Ghost Dancer was there along with Spotted Dove, but Emily knew this was beyond traditional midwifery. "I have to cut," she told Martha, her hands steady despite her fear. "Like the surgery texts describe. It's the only way to save you both." Martha grabbed her hand. "I trust you." Emily had never performed surgery, had only read about it, seen diagrams. But she knew anatomy from her mother's teaching, had steady hands from years of detailed work, and most importantly had no choice. Martha and the baby would die without intervention. She sterilized everything with boiling water and alcohol, had Standing Wolf. "Hold the lanterns for light," instructed Ghost Dancer and Spotted Dove on how to assist. Then, with a prayer to every deity she could think of, she made the first incision. The surgery took 2 hours. Emily worked with total focus, her world narrowing to the immediate task: cut, clamp, extract the baby, stop the bleeding suture. When she finally lifted the baby, a girl, small but fierce, and heard her cry, Emily's legs nearly gave out. Martha survived, though recovery was slow. She named her daughter Emily Rose for the aunt who saved both our lives. The successful surgery spread Emily's reputation beyond the ranch. Soon, people were traveling from neighboring communities seeking the Apache medicine woman, who could cure what town doctors couldn't. Emily found herself in an impossible position. Officially, she couldn't practice medicine without a license she could never obtain. Unofficially, she was the most skilled healer for 50 miles in any direction. Diego solved the problem with typical creativity, officially employing her as a veterinarian for the ranch, which required no license, while everyone understood she treated whoever needed help. James grew rapidly, a bright, inquisitive child who moved seamlessly between worlds. He would help Ghost Dancer gather medicine plants in the morning, speaking Apache, then sit with Martha for English lessons in the afternoon, and play with the vaqueros' children in Spanish by evening. Standing Wolf taught him to track and ride, while Emily taught him to read and write. "He will have choices we never had," Standing Wolf said one day, watching James read aloud from both an English primer and Apache symbols Ghost Dancer had drawn in the dirt. "If we can keep this place safe for him to grow," Emily replied. Safety was always fragile. The Apache at San Carlos faced increasing pressure to send their children to boarding schools designed to kill the Indian, save the man. Some families fled to the ranch instead, willing to work as laborers rather than lose their children to forced assimilation. One such family brought disturbing news. Standing Wolf's death certificate was being questioned. Someone had recognized him at a cattle sale, reported that the dead Apache was very much alive. If the army investigated, everything they'd built would crumble. "We could run," Emily suggested that night as they lay awake, the weight of threat heavy between them. Take James, go to Canada or Mexico. Running is no life for our son, Standing Wolf replied. In this place, these people, they need what we've built. The school, the medical care, the proof that different peoples can live together. Then what do we do? The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Blackwell wrote that she was organizing a medical conference in San Francisco focusing on frontier medicine and treatment of indigenous populations. She invited Emily to present her work, offering official recognition that might provide some protection. It's dangerous, Standing Wolf said. You'll be visible questioned. But if it works, I'll have credentials connections, legal standing that protects us all. The decision to go was agonizing. Emily had never been apart from James, now 3, and clinging to her skirts, but this was for his future, for all their futures. Standing Wolf and James accompanied her as far as the stage stop where Emily would catch the coach to the railroad. The parting was wrenching. Mama go? James asked, his blue eyes so like hers, filling with tears. Mama will come back, Emily promised, holding him tight. Very soon. Be good for Papa and Grandmother Ghost Dancer. Standing Wolf pulled her close, speaking quietly in Apache. Come back to us, she who bridges waters. We are not whole without you. The conference was a revolution for Emily. She stood before an audience of medical professionals, mostly men, entirely white, and presented her work on treating disease in mixed populations, on combining traditional and modern medicine, on the importance of cultural understanding and healing. The reception was mixed. Some dismissed her as an untrained woman playing at medicine. Others were intrigued by her results, especially the low mortality rate she'd achieved during the measles outbreak. Dr. Blackwell was her champion, using her influence to arrange meetings with progressive doctors and medical suppliers. By the conference's end, Emily had secured not a medical degree that was still impossible, but something almost as valuable: recognition as a frontier medical practitioner and connections to suppliers who would provide vaccines and medicines at cost. She also made an unexpected ally, a young doctor named William Chen, Chinese-American, and facing his own battles for acceptance, understood her position viscerally. We heal people, he said simply. That should be all that matters, but we both know it isn't. He gave her medical texts in Chinese that his grandfather had translated, adding another tradition to her growing synthesis of healing knowledge. The return journey felt endless, but finally Emily saw the familiar mountains rising before her. As the stage approached the ranch, she saw them Standing Wolf, tall and watchful, James bouncing with excitement in his arms. The reunion was joyous. James refused to let go of her for hours, chattering in his mixed language about everything she'd missed. Standing Wolf's embrace that night held desperate relief. I counted each day, he admitted, afraid you would see the larger world and not want to return to our small one. This is the only world I want, Emily assured him, the one we're building together. But the world they were building faced new challenges. The federal government was increasing pressure on unauthorized Indians living off reservations. The ranch's protection was wearing thin, and Diego was facing his own pressures from American authorities who resented a Mexican landowner's success. The crisis came to a head when federal marshals arrived with eviction notices for all Apache on the property, claiming they were violating reservation boundaries. These people are my employees, Diego argued. They have right to work where they choose. Not if they're Indians, the marshal replied coldly. Indians belong on reservations nowhere else. Emily stepped forward, her voice calm despite her racing heart. Many of these people are Mexican citizens, not Apache. Their grandparents were taken in raids generations ago. They're recovering their Mexican heritage. It was a creative interpretation of truth. Some of the Apache did have Mexican ancestry through centuries of raiding and intermarriage. The marshal looked skeptical but had no immediate way to disprove it. I'll need documentation, he said finally. Of course, Diego replied smoothly. My lawyer will provide everything needed. As the marshals left, everyone knew this was temporary reprieve at best. That night, the community gathered to discuss options. Some wanted to fight, others to flee, still others to submit to reservation life. There is another way, Taz, Ghost Dancer said, her voice carrying despite her age. Some of us are old, ready for the next world. Let us go to the reservation, take the government's attention. The young, the children, they stay here with new names, new papers. It was heartbreaking, but practical. Those who went would sacrifice their freedom for the next generation's chance at choice. Standing Wolf was torn. As a warrior, he should go with the elders. As a father and husband, he needed to stay. You stay, Chief Nachi said, visiting one last time. Your war is different, fighting with papers and laws, not guns. Your son will need you to teach him both ways of being warrior. The departure was sorrowful. Ghost Dancer gave James her medicine bundle, whispering blessings in the old language. Emily wept openly, losing the woman who'd become more mother to her than her own had ever been. You are the bridge, Ghost Dancer told her. You and Standing Wolf, James, and the children to come. You are how we survive, changed but not lost. As the elders departed for San Carlos, choosing confinement to preserve the freedom of others, Emily stood with her family watching until they disappeared into the distance. James, too young to fully understand, waved goodbye to his grandmother, then turned to his parents with the resilience of childhood. Grandmother said, "I must learn all the medicines now," he said solemnly. Apache and white and Mexican and Chinese medicine. She said, "I will need them all." Emily knelt beside her son, seeing in his mixed features the future they were building, complex, sometimes painful, but alive with possibility. "Yes," she told him, "you'll need them all. We all will." The years that followed were marked by constant adaptation. Diego's creative paperwork transformed Apache workers into displaced Mexican citizens. Emily's medical practice grew, operating in legal gray areas but saving lives regardless. Standing Wolf became invaluable to the ranch's operation, his knowledge of horses and land management keeping them profitable despite increasing competition from American ranchers. James grew into his heritage as comfortable discussing literature with Martha as he was tracking deer with Standing Wolf. He spoke 4 languages fluently, could set a broken bone or birth a calf, and moved through the world with a confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was. All of it. Not despite the contradictions, but because of them. When Emily became pregnant again, the community celebrated. This child would be born into a more stable world, one where their mixed family was, if not fully accepted, at least established. The birth was easier than James's had been, and when Emily delivered a daughter with Standing Wolf's dark eyes and her delicate features, they named her Sarah Ghost Dancer Carter. American first name Apache. Middle name Emily's surname that had become their shield and identity. She will have even more choices than James, Standing Wolf said, holding his daughter with the same wonder he'd shown with his son. God willing, Emily replied, exhausted but content. As she recovered, watching Standing Wolf teach James to hold his baby sister while Martha cooked dinner and Spotted Dove's children played outside. Emily reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. From a desperate widow abandoned in the desert to matriarch of an impossible family, from unwilling Apache bride to willing bridge between worlds. The challenges would continue, they always did. The world was changing rapidly, railroads bringing more settlers, the frontier closing, the old ways dying. But here on this ranch, in this constructed family of Apache and Mexican and white, they had created something new. Not a solution to all problems, but proof that different paths existed. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed so much struggle and survival, Emily stood with Standing Wolf watching their children play. James was teaching his sister Apache words while she babbled back in baby talk that transcended all languages. "Do you ever regret it?" Standing Wolf asked. "The life you could have had if I hadn't found you in that storm." Emily considered the question. She could have remarried some frontier merchant, lived a respectable if confined life. She could have returned east, hidden her past, found safety in conventionality. Instead, she had chosen this complexity and danger and love that transcended every boundary society tried to impose. "The only thing I regret," she said, turning to face him fully, "is that it took a sandstorm to bring us together. Everything else, every challenge, every loss, every fight has been worth it for this." Standing Wolf pulled her close, and they stood together watching the first stars emerge in the desert sky. Somewhere Ghost Dancer was confined to a reservation, but her spirit lived on in the medicines James practiced. Somewhere, Chief Nachi navigated the impossible balance of preserving Apache identity under government control. Somewhere, the world was changing in ways that would make their children's lives both easier and harder. But here now, in this moment, they had carved out a space where love could exist across all boundaries, where children could grow up whole, despite the world's insistence on fragments, where an unwilling Apache bride had become a willing architect of a new way of being. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility, and Emily breathed it in deeply. Grateful for the storm that had nearly killed her, but had instead given her everything: a love that transcended cultures, children who embodied hope, and a purpose that would outlive them all. As they walked back to their cabin, Standing Wolf began singing quietly in Apache, a song about bridges over rushing water, about paths through impossible terrain, about finding home in unexpected places. Emily joined him, her voice harmonizing with his, their languages different, but their meaning the same. Behind them, James carried his sister carefully, already the protective older brother, already the bridge to futures they could only imagine. The lamplight from the ranch buildings created pools of warmth in the gathering darkness, beacons of the small civilization they had built from necessity and hope. This was their victory, not conquest or submission, but synthesis. Not the ending of one story or the beginning of another, but the continuous weaving of all stories into something new, something that could only have been born from a sandstorm and an unwilling bride who became so much more. The night settled around them like a blanket, and life continued complex, challenging, and absolutely worth every moment of struggle that had brought them here.